In 2012, a 17-year-old girl named Jessica Evans was living with her mother, Chris. Just before summer vacation, she met 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler, who had recently moved across the street to his brother's house. They connected at a party and quickly developed a bond. Jacob was a quiet country boy who had recently returned from a 3-year stint in Iraq. Although he was 5 years older than Jessica, Chris felt reassured and trusted him. On August 26, 2012, Jessica asked Chris for permission to join Jacob on a night fishing trip at the Little Wabash River, a popular location. Initially hesitant, Chris eventually agreed after Jessica persuaded her, but insisted that Jessica be careful and return home by 5 a.m. She assured her mother that she understood and would return to her sister Megan's house at that time to babysit her nephew Miles. Little did she know that this fishing trip would be her last. Just before midnight, Chris called Jessica to check on her. Jessica assured her mother that she was fine and that she and Jacob were nearly done fishing and would be home soon. However, when Chris woke up at 5 the next morning, she realized that Jessica had not returned home. This was unusual, especially since Jessica had plans to babysit her nephew. Concerned, Chris tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but there was no answer. She also sent text messages that went unanswered. Chris felt something was wrong. She was sure Jessica would inform her if plans changed. Chris went to Jacob's house, but his brother Jeremy said that Jacob hadn't come home either. Jeremy wasn't worried because he believed Jacob could handle himself. However, by 9 a.m., Jessica's family was beginning to worry. Chris thought it was possible that Jacob's truck had broken down or that they were stuck somewhere. After 12 hours without any news about Jessica and Jacob, Chris contacted the White County Sheriff's Office for assistance. Sheriff Doug Meyer, who was relaxing at home, received the call but wasn't overly concerned. He speculated that Jessica and Jacob might have run away together and figured they were likely okay, but he needed to find out where they had gone. The sheriff decided to request a warrant to trace Jessica's cell phone, but that could take some time. Meanwhile, the sheriff's deputies followed the family's advice and headed to the spot where Jessica and Jacob were supposed to be fishing. The area was remote, accessible only by gravel roads. The deputies found a 50-foot-long overgrown path that led to a popular fishing location. They saw clear signs that someone had been there, such as abandoned packages, but there were no signs of any trouble or crime. An extinguished campfire was present, but the area was clean, and Jacob's truck was missing. However, the sheriff's intuition about Jessica and Jacob led him to believe that nothing serious had happened. It seemed like they were simply hanging out together. Eventually, the sheriff obtained records from Jessica's cell phone carrier to help track her phone. They discovered that the phone's signal was coming from a tower near the campground area where she and Jacob had been fishing. This indicated that Jessica's phone was still active and nearby, which contradicted the sheriff's assumption that she had simply run away. If Jessica and Jacob were still there, why weren't they answering their phones? Investigators began to worry that they might be stranded, injured, or worse. News of Jessica and Jacob's disappearance quickly spread through Norris City, raising alarms in the community. Some speculated that they had just run away, but Chris was confident that Jessica would not do that. Upon learning that Jessica's cell phone was still in the vicinity of the fishing site, the sheriff's office felt a growing sense of unease about the situation. At dawn the following day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office, along with neighboring law enforcement and many volunteers, returned to the fishing area to search for any traces of Jacob and Jessica. Their families also joined in the search. However, after 3 hours, they had no leads. Neither Jacob nor Jessica nor their pickup truck was found. The pickup must have been at the scene if something had happened to them. But what if they had discarded their phones and fled? If they had indeed left together, they would eventually create an electronic footprint. The police also checked their bank card usage to see if there had been any transactions but found no activity. While there were no significant findings in the bank statements, one clue emerged from Jessica's phone records. The police were aware of the midnight call from Chris, but Jessica had another phone conversation shortly after, around 12:30 a.m. on Sunday night. Investigators identified the person she spoke with as a young man named Ron Wooderson. His name was familiar to the police due to his past legal issues, raising their suspicions about his involvement. Consequently, they decided to interview Ron to understand the details of their conversation. Sheriff's deputies met with Ron and asked him about his last interaction with Jessica. He eventually acknowledged that he called her late at night, stating he was at a party with friends. Ron claimed he wanted Jessica to join him at the party, but when she mentioned she was busy fishing, Jacob, her boyfriend, grabbed the phone. Ron explained that Jacob had explicitly prohibited him from calling Jessica, which led to a heated argument, primarily fueled by Jacob's anger over Ron contacting his girlfriend. The deputies recorded the names of other party attendees and verified Ron's alibi. They found that everyone else confirmed he did not leave the party after the call. By the end of the day, search volunteers were ready to go home without any leads. However, one of Jacob's friends, while riding an ATV, discovered a pickup truck hidden in the woods behind an old farmhouse, about 2 miles from where Jacob and Jessica had been fishing. It turned out to be Jacob's truck. The situation quickly became distressing when they found a woman's body in the back of the truck, shot twice in the head. Her condition raised further alarm. She was partially clothed, with some of her clothes strewn on the ground nearby. Investigators suspected that more than just a murder had occurred. The victim had no identification, but in such a tight-knit community, that was not a significant issue. Some of the investigators recognized Jessica from her entire life, and it became clear that they had just discovered her body. The discovery of Jessica's body marked a turning point. This suggested that she may have met with a man before her death and may have fought back. Authorities hoped that the coroner could obtain DNA evidence from the crime scene. The police searched the area around the pickup and found shell casings that matched the 2 wounds on Jessica's head. The casings were located on the right side of the truck, next to a large bloodstain, indicating that Jessica had been shot at that location. As investigators examined Jacob's pickup truck, which was filled with fishing gear and personal belongings, they noted that Jacob was missing. A crucial clue emerged when they discovered blood in the driver's side cab of the truck. Blood samples were sent for DNA testing to determine whose blood it was and to locate Jacob. Law enforcement began to consider Jacob as a potential suspect, questioning whether he was a victim himself or if he was responsible for Jessica's death. Community suspicions arose, with some believing that Jacob, a veteran, had the skills to commit murder. Speculation swirled that a late-night phone call from Ron might have triggered a violent reaction from Jacob. Investigators grew increasingly concerned about Jacob's mental state, particularly if he felt he was losing Jessica. The day after Jessica's body was found, the police obtained a search warrant for Jacob's brother's house, suspecting that Jacob might be hiding there. Although they didn't find him, they discovered that one of his guns was missing. Jeremy, Jacob's brother, said there was no reason to worry. Jacob had simply taken the gun for a fishing trip, which he considered normal. However, investigators became concerned when they learned that the missing gun was a .22, matching the shell casings found at the crime scene. Despite this, Jacob's family insisted he was innocent, believing that he would have put his life on the line to protect Jessica if she had been in danger. As the week went by, the search for Jacob intensified. Police from multiple counties joined forces, deploying search teams, K-9 units, and aerial surveillance to locate him. The White County Crime Suppression Unit even offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to Jacob's capture. This reward prompted several calls to the sheriff's office with tips, but one was particularly noteworthy. An employee at a gas station located 12 miles from where Jessica's body was found reported seeing Jacob buy a pack of cigarettes on Sunday night, about a day after he and Jessica disappeared. The employee noted that Jacob was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt and recalled seeing an ID card in his wallet that appeared to belong to Jacob Wheeler. This made Jacob the primary suspect in Jessica's case. As time passed, it seemed increasingly likely that Jacob was on the run. Investigators visited the gas station to review surveillance footage, where they spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt who partially obscured his face and avoided looking directly at the camera. Although it was a warm night and would have been uncomfortable in such attire, it was difficult to confirm with certainty that he was Jacob. The man quickly purchased cigarettes and left the store. While the footage from one camera did not reveal his face, a second camera outside captured him getting into a car driven by a woman, a person one of the sheriff's deputies recognized. Police quickly went to the woman's home, where they saw the car from the gas station video parked nearby. When questioned by investigators, the woman admitted to driving the man to the gas station but insisted he wasn't Jacob, claiming he was her boyfriend instead. This left the identity of the man in the video as a dead end, and all police attention turned back to Jacob. Detectives believed he was alive and suspected his brother Jeremy of hiding him. They searched his house at night to catch him off guard, but even after a second search, there was still no sign that he had been there. After Jacob disappeared, his brother and father were certain he had nothing to do with Jessica's death. His father, Harold, was determined to prove his son's innocence. He believed he was searching for Jacob's body, not the body of his son. 6 days later, Sheriff Doug Meyer received a call from Harold, who mentioned that he had discovered something that others had overlooked. He believed he saw car parts in a wooded area just a quarter-mile from where Jacob and Jessica were camping. Investigators decided to follow up on this lead and found some car parts, specifically pieces that belonged to the fender of a pickup truck. The area where the parts were located showed damage to the trees, indicating that a pickup truck had driven into the woods and through the trees, causing damage. However, it was clear that these were not Jacob's truck. While the connection to the crime was unclear, the discovery piqued investigators' interest as they had no other leads. One of the car parts had a serial number, which the police were able to look up online to determine the specific model of the pickup truck. In a small town, it's relatively easy to track down such a vehicle. One of the sheriff's deputies was familiar with a man named Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician from White County, who drove a similar truck. But could he be involved in a violent crime? Danny had never caused trouble, had no criminal record, and was a well-known member of the community. Investigators decided to visit his workplace to speak with him. They found his pickup truck in the parking lot, which had considerable damage consistent with the parts discovered in the woods. As the investigator examined the pickup truck, Sheriff Doug Meyer questioned Danny about the damage. Danny explained that he had gone fishing on the Little Wabash River but had difficulty launching his boat because he was very drunk. He couldn't remember much from that night, but he did recall that it had been around 1 a.m. on the same night that Jacob and Jessica went fishing. He insisted that he didn't see anyone else in the area during his time there. Meanwhile, investigators made a significant discovery. They found a considerable amount of blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. He was visibly shocked when they informed him about it. The sheriff advised Danny that if he had anything to share, he should do so now. Danny then revealed that he had been in the woods that night and had witnessed Jacob attack Jessica twice. However, this account did not clarify why there was blood in his truck. Forensic analysis confirmed it was human blood. Investigators took Danny to the police station for further questioning. He reiterated that he was drunk, went to the Little Wabash River, and encountered Jacob and Jessica. He mentioned that Jacob had gone into the woods, leaving him alone with Jessica. Danny claimed that Jessica had come on to him of her own accord. He said they went to his truck and parked 2 miles away behind an abandoned farmhouse. According to him, they had consensual intimate contact until Jacob found them in the dark. An argument broke out between Jacob and Jessica, during which Jacob attacked her. Danny stated that he felt scared when Jacob approached him, leading to a struggle during which the gun went off, injuring Jacob. He claimed this shot was accidental. In a panic, he placed Jacob in the back of his pickup truck, worried that no one would believe his story of self-defense, so he concealed the body where it wouldn't be found. Danny provided detailed information about where he had left Jacob's body. The police were skeptical of Danny's story, as it did not align with Jessica's character. His account of how Jessica willingly came with him, only for Jacob to show up unexpectedly, seemed implausible. Ultimately, it was determined that he had attacked Jacob, thus confirming the suspicions held by Jacob's family. Consequently, Danny Costin was arrested. Investigators followed Danny's directions to find Jacob's body, venturing deeper into the woods along a dirt road. After 6 days of searching, they discovered Jacob's body with a bullet wound in his head. Forensic evidence contradicted Danny's claims. Blood found in Jacob's pickup truck, which belonged to Jacob, did not align with Danny's narrative. He had previously stated that he placed Jacob's body in his own truck, raising questions about the source of the blood. During a reinterrogation, inconsistencies in Danny's account led him to admit the truth. He explained that he attempted to drive his truck to launch a boat, but, being very drunk and faced with dense woods, he sought help from Jacob and Jessica. Although Jacob advised against it because of Danny's intoxication, they eventually agreed to help him. After climbing into the back of Jacob's truck, Danny, armed with a pistol, unexpectedly shot Jacob in the head through the driver's side window, in full view of Jessica, who was terrified and screamed. Danny then pulls Jacob out of the truck, saying he has no idea why he shot Jacob or what his next actions will be. Jessica begs Danny to spare her life, which prompts the sheriff to ask if she will agree to intimacy in exchange for her safety. Danny interpreted her desperate plea for self-preservation as an offer, and he proceeded to assault her in the back of Jacob's truck. Despite her begging, he shot her, asserting afterward that he did not know why he committed these acts. Afterward, he transported Jessica's body in Jacob's truck, driving to Wayne County to hide Jacob's body while discarding both his gun and Jacob's gun out of the window during the trip. The police have never recovered either firearm. On September 4, 2012, Danny appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He later changed his testimony, claiming he had not been informed of his rights before questioning, but an appeals court dismissed his appeal. Video evidence from the interrogation showed that he was indeed read his rights. Additionally, police had strong evidence linking Danny to the crime. His truck contained Jacob's blood, and DNA from Jessica was found on his body. In January 2014, Candace Brown, Danny's girlfriend, was found guilty of lying to the authorities during the initial investigation. She had provided him with a false alibi. She was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and was required to pay various court fees and fines. On August 20, 2013, Danny Costin was convicted and sentenced to 53 years in prison. Judge Tom Foster stated he was constrained by the plea agreement between the state and defense but believed Danny deserved a harsher sentence. Danny had agreed to waive a jury trial in return for lesser charges and a potentially reduced sentence if found guilty. Judge Foster noted that the court accepted this deal only with the consent of Jessica's and Jacob's families. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sierra Halseth. Sierra was a sweet young girl who loved spending time with her father, taking lots of pictures together. However, she burned those pictures and ran away with her boyfriend. She later blamed her father for everything, claiming that he had abused her. But was her words true? If so, why had no one heard of them before? Here is the full story of Sierra Halseth, her sudden change in behavior, and the tragic death of Daniel Halseth. Daniel Halseth was born in January 1976. He earned his bachelor's degree in music from Western Oregon University, where he was known for his drumming skills. He then pursued a degree in business, with the goal of becoming a successful businessman, and he eventually achieved that goal. At the age of 20, he met Elizabeth, the youngest woman ever elected to the Nevada State Senate. They got married in March 2001, which led Daniel to move to Nevada. The couple had 3 children, Dana, Jordan, and Sierra. They settled in Las Vegas because Daniel found a job there, but the family was not happy for a long time. 10 years after their wedding, Daniel and Elizabeth divorced. In October 2011, Daniel was arrested after Elizabeth accused him of trying to force her to have sex, even though they were still legally married. A month later, he filed for divorce, accusing Elizabeth of cheating on him. Sierra's siblings were still young when their parents divorced, but the family's troubles continued. Daniel and Elizabeth both remarried quickly. Despite this, Daniel and his ex-wife Elizabeth maintained their relationship for the sake of their children and even maintained a joint bank account. However, due to the constant instability, Elizabeth began a custody battle that lasted until Ciara started high school. Eventually, Dana and Jordan moved in with Elizabeth, while Ciara stayed with Daniel. The father and daughter have a close bond, and Daniel often shares photos of him and Ciara having fun together on social media, showing his love for his youngest daughter. In June 2020, Ciara began dating 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero, who was 2 years her senior. Unlike typical high school relationships, their relationship progressed quickly. They began making alarming plans for the future, including robbing their parents and running away to California. Both sets of parents quickly noticed negative changes in Ciara and Aaron's behavior, fearing that the situation would worsen if the kids spent time together. Unfortunately, the parents' worries and concerns led the couple to make poor choices. By Christmas 2020, Aaron and Ciara's families decided that the young couple should stop dating, and they were officially banned from dating. While it may seem like Ciara and Aaron are following their parents' wishes, that is not the case. Ciara and Aaron quietly waited for the right moment to carry out their plan of revenge against their families. Their goal was to eliminate their parents who had hindered their relationship. On December 16, 2020, Ciara's father, Daniel, wrote a heartfelt post for her birthday, expressing his love for her. He shared that when he was 9 years old, he dreamed of having a big family and always wanted to be a great father. He expressed his happiness that he had fulfilled that dream, especially because he had Ciara. Little did he know that Ciara was plotting to kill him at the time. On April 3, 2021, Daniel shared an old video online of him and his daughter having fun together, saying that they were enjoying their time. 5 days later, Ciara ran away from home. That same day, another unusual thing happened. $1,300 was withdrawn from her parents' joint bank account without any notice. Elizabeth found this strange because Daniel would never withdraw such a large amount of money without informing her. Elizabeth sent Daniel a text message, but he did not respond all day. By this point, many people, including Elizabeth and his mother, Christina, were worried because Daniel had stopped answering his phone. Elizabeth then texted her daughter, Ciara, to ask how Daniel was doing. Surprisingly, Ciara replied that Daniel's phone was broken, but he was fine. However, Daniel's family grew increasingly concerned. They knew he could use his laptop to communicate, and if his phone was broken, he could fix it quickly. Daniel regularly posting videos on Instagram and sharing his thoughts on Twitter with many followers. His mother was aware of this, so his sudden silence was concerning to her. She asked a family friend to check if Daniel was at home. The family friend contacted Ciara to find out where her father was. Ciara replied that he was in the shower. The friend then asked why Daniel wasn't answering his phone. Ciara explained that her phone was broken. She assured the family friend that she would have her father call back from another phone as soon as he finished showering. However, that didn't happen, and the next day, Ciara stopped answering calls and texts. Christina's increasingly concerned when Ciara did not respond to her texts. Concerned, she decided to call her niece, but Ciara only said that her father was in the shower. In a fit of rage, Christina threatened to call the police, causing Ciara to stop answering her phone altogether. That day, surveillance footage showed Daniel's blue Nissan leaving the area, causing Christina to become even more concerned. She continued to call on Wednesday, debating whether to contact the police or have Peggy and Joey come over. Eventually, Ciara stopped answering her phone altogether. Meanwhile, Joey and Peggy, Daniel's landlords and close friends, were on their way, but they informed Christina that it would take a few hours for them to arrive because they were out of town. Christina was so worried that she decided to call 911 to report that her son, Daniel, had been missing for 2 days. Daniel had been absent from work, and friends and family had been unable to reach him. Christina noted that Daniel was not usually like this. He lived with his daughter, who was also not returning calls or texts. The most worrying detail was that money had been withdrawn from Daniel's account at 3 different ATMs. Police were then dispatched to the address, but Joe and Peggy had already arrived. When Joey and Peggy arrived at Daniel's house, they found the front door open and Daniel's car gone. They cautiously walked inside and immediately smelled a strong smell of smoke. They searched every room in the house, but found only the remains of a fire. There was no sign of Daniel. However, things took a turn for the worse when they entered the garage. In the middle of the garage, they saw a sleeping bag with something inside. Upon inspection, they discovered Daniel's body, burned beyond recognition. Joey quickly called the police and told them they were the homeowners. They had just arrived and discovered that a fire had broken out in the house 2 days earlier. Joey also mentioned that he had seen a body in a sleeping bag in the garage. A few minutes later, the police arrived at their address. During their investigation, they confirmed that Daniel, 45, had been brutally murdered. The forensic team discovered a significant amount of shocking evidence in Daniel's home. First, they found a chainsaw carelessly left on the living room floor. In the kitchen, there was another saw with blood smeared along its edge, and 2 knives were found in the sink. The police also located a receipt from a store and an ATM. Despite signs of a fire in the living room and the bloody saw in the kitchen, it was evident that someone had made serious efforts to clean the house. Daniel's autopsy revealed a gruesome scene. He had suffered 70 slash wounds. Most of these injuries were to his head, neck, and torso. His body, burned beyond recognition, was stuffed into a sleeping bag and moved to the garage. Police concluded that the person responsible for Daniel's death harbored intense hatred, as evidenced by the brutal stabbing and beating he endured. After he died, the attacker even burned his body in the living room. When the police spoke to the family, it was clear that there were no obvious suspects. No one could understand why Daniel had such a vicious enemy. However, Christina noted that Sierra had been acting very strangely. When asked about Daniel's situation, she always replied that her father was taking a shower. And then Sierra stopped contacting Christina completely. Additionally, Sierra had gone missing from the house. On April 9, police received a tip that led them to a receipt from a local store and access to surveillance camera footage. They discovered that Aaron had purchased a saw and gloves. That same day, Sierra was seen in the footage leaving the store with 2 bottles of bleach, using Daniel's credit card to make the purchase. Police quickly gathered information about Aaron. They learned that both families had forbidden Aaron and Sierra from seeing each other, so he ran away from home on April 8. With the addition of surveillance footage, police had enough evidence to issue arrest warrants for them. On April 13, police arrested Sierra and Aaron 400 miles from their home in Salt Lake City, Utah, for not paying their bus fare. When police conducted a background check, they discovered that the couple was wanted for murder. Additionally, police discovered Daniel's blue Nissan, the car Sierra and Aaron had used to get away. Inside the trunk, they found a bloody blanket. Police seized Sierra and Aaron's phones as evidence. They examined the contents and found a disturbing video on Sierra's phone. In the video, Sierra and Aaron talked about killing Daniel without showing any remorse. After Sierra and Aaron were arrested in Utah, they were taken to the Clark County Detention Center in Nevada. The investigation at the crime scene revealed that Sierra and Aaron intended to dismember Daniel, as a chainsaw and a handsaw were discovered in the house and had been recently purchased for that purpose. As a result, Sierra and Aaron face multiple charges, including murder, arson, conspiracy to commit robbery, and 4 counts of fraudulent use of a credit or debit card. On June 15, 2021, Sierra and Aaron pleaded not guilty at their initial hearing. The case has attracted attention, especially because Sierra seems to have no remorse for her actions against her father. Many were shocked by her seeming indifference. Sierra's defense said her parents' divorce and the long custody battle had a significant impact on Sierra. The therapist then explained that this type of trauma can significantly disrupt a child's development. If Sierra had previously experienced emotional trauma, any change or loss could have added to her feelings of despair. Daniel's family has stated that Sierra and Aaron's complete lack of remorse is reprehensible and inexcusable. They expect justice to be served in the most serious manner. They loved Daniel deeply and miss him. This will be their only statement. In May 2022, Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero agreed to a plea deal. However, it is unclear whether the couple truly felt remorse or whether they agreed to the plea deal in exchange for a lighter sentence. The judge sentenced Sierra and Aaron to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. This was part of the deal they made when they pleaded guilty to murder and other charges. After 22 years, they could be released around the age of 40, which would give them a chance to start over. After the verdict, Daniel's mother, Christina, spoke to the press, expressing her grief. Christina said that Sierra had shown no remorse for the murder she had committed. In fact, during the trial, Sierra tried to blame Daniel, claiming that she had been forced into the act. Sierra said that her father had assaulted her, pinned her down, and beat her. However, Christina pointed out that Sierra could have reported the incident to the police, but instead chose a different and more tragic course of action. In a surprising turn of events, Aaron was the only one to apologize for his actions. He sought forgiveness from Daniel's family, who noticed that Aaron showed remorse and emotion, unlike Sierra. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Lydia Guardo. Raymond Guardo married Jacqueline in 1956. In the early years of their marriage, they had 2 children, a son named Bruno and a daughter named Nadia. At first, their family appeared to be typical and happy. However, after Nadia's birth, Raymond was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While Raymond was in prison, his wife Jacqueline began an affair with another man and became pregnant. When she was allowed to visit him in prison, she informed him that the child was not his. Despite this, he tolerated his wife's infidelity and expressed his desire to adopt the child. Soon, on November 13, 1960, the girl was born, named Lydia Guardo. Years later, Raymond was released from prison, but his relationship with his wife Jacqueline has worsened. She was left alone to care for their 3 children and seemed to have little affection for them. So she decided to send her children to an orphanage, and soon after, her children were adopted by a family. Fortunately, the children were placed with a loving family that provided them with everything they needed to begin a new chapter in their lives. With this support, Bruno, the oldest child, always held onto the hope that his biological parents would come for him and his younger sisters. He even encouraged his sisters to believe that this would happen one day. While still in prison, Raymond saw an advertisement in the newspaper for a woman named Lucienne Ulpat, who was seeking a pen pal. After his release, he found Lucienne and soon married her. Following the marriage, he became determined to reclaim his children by any means. One night, he took a gun and broke into the home of the family that was taking care of his children. The noise frightened the girls. Nadia didn't remember what her father, Raymond, looked like, and Lydia had never seen him before. They thought he might be a kidnapper and were worried that they might be in danger. Raymond successfully took the children from their foster family and placed them in his car, despite their threats to call the police. After several hours of driving, he brought the children to his home, where he introduced them to Lucienne, telling them that she was their new mother and that they would need to follow her rules. During the first years of living together, everything seemed quite stable, at least judging by family photos from the time. The family moved to a new house in a quiet neighborhood. Raymond received a cash allowance and started his own business, which focused on instant postcard printing and various office tasks. Lucienne occasionally worked in his company, but primarily handled office work. However, as time passed, the family's life began to change dramatically. The children suffered abuse from their father, Raymond, and stepmother, Lucienne. Lydia's first memory from this period was witnessing Raymond beat Bruno for playing with a neighbor's child. When Raymond and Lucienne went to work, they hired young girls to care for the children. Upon returning home, he would pressure these girls to drink alcohol with him. On one occasion, he even attempted to persuade one of the girls to have sex, but she managed to escape. The girl's father then came to the house to confront Raymond and seriously injured him. After that incident, Raymond stopped hiring nannies. Later, he bought a trailer to take his family on vacation to the beach. Once they arrived, they spent time swimming and relaxing like other vacationers. However, an unsettling event occurred. While in the water, Raymond approached his daughter, Nadia, and pressed her against him inappropriately. She struggled to escape his grip, but this only made things worse. From that point on, she became the target of Raymond's abuse. Lydia recalls one day, she heard Nadia's cries coming from the trailer. This marked the beginning of Raymond's sexual abuse of one of his daughters. After that, parents, Raymond and Lucienne, often beat and do other terrible things to their children. Bruno and Nadia stopped going to elementary school, while Lydia, who had never been to school, faced severe mistreatment. This may have been because she was not Raymond's biological daughter. A few years later, around 1971, when Lydia was over 8 years old, the bullying began to get worse. The first incident occurs when Lucienne gets angry because Lydia comes home dirty after playing outside. Her stepmother, Lucienne, put her in a bathtub filled with boiling water and bleach. She recalls that her sensitive skin began to peel and float to the surface of the water. Hearing her screams, Raymond rushed into the bathroom, pulled she out, and laid her on the bed. He attempted to treat her burns with vegetable oil, but soon realized the injuries were severe. Then, she was taken to the hospital, and doctors determined she had third-degree burns. So that Lucienne wouldn't be responsible for the incident, Raymond blamed the city government for providing too hot water. Meanwhile, Lydia was transferred to the intensive care unit and then to the burns unit at the Lion City Hospital, where she remained for several months. She also underwent several skin grafts. Raymond is always by Lydia's side, not because he was a good father, but just to keep her from sharing the incident with others. Eventually, he grew weary of the situation and declared that he would take she home to continue her treatment. Medical professionals were against this decision, but Raymond secured the support of their family doctor, who wrote a confirming that he would continue to treat Lydia. Consequently, Raymond picked Lydia up and carried her out of the burn unit. Back home, Raymond begins to take care of Lydia. He regularly changed her dressings and started to touch her inappropriately. One day, he came home with a camera, claiming he needed to take pictures for the insurance company. He first photographed Lydia, asking her to smile, and then took pictures of her private areas. He then told the girl that the family doctor had prescribed this medicine. He forced her to inhale that drug, leaving her in a semi-conscious state. Although she was aware that he was about to do something strange and painful, she was unable to resist. At that time, he was sexually assaulting she. During this time, Raymond's wife, Lucienne, did not intervene. Instead, she encouraged his behavior. For 9 years, Lydia came to see what was happening as normal. She believed her father, Raymond, loved her, which led her to think there was nothing wrong with his actions. Years later, in an interview with a French television show, Lydia explained how Raymond justified his horrific actions. He told his children that he was doing this for their well-being. He also claimed that, as their father, he had the right to do so. In 1975, the Guardo family moved to the village of Coulombe, about 40 kilometers from Paris. At their new home, Raymond and Lucienne continued to abuse their children. The teenagers still did not attend school and had very little contact with the outside world. After returning to work, Raymond managed to get permission to park his printing van at a shopping center. To attract attention, he displayed photos of Lydia's burned legs on the van. Next to the photos, there were posters announcing that Lydia's injuries were due to the negligence of the authorities, and that they had yet to compensate her. Thus, he created the image of a father, calling for public attention and justice. When he felt that the photos alone weren't enough, Raymond forced Lydia to accompany him so that people could see her scars. He used the sympathy of bystanders to sell his goods and make money. Bruno was the first to try to stop the abuse from Raymond and Lucienne. Before that, Bruno, Nadia, and Lydia tried to escape, but they were caught and punished. Despite this, Bruno, who had suffered years of physical abuse, eventually managed to escape. According to some sources, Bruno contacted the authorities to report his family's problem. However, the authorities did not take his claims seriously. Meanwhile, his younger sisters, Nadia and Lydia, continued to suffer from Raymond's behavior. As they grew older, their bodies began to change. Noticing this, Raymond bandaged his daughters' chests with elastic bandages, making it difficult for them to breathe. The bandages eventually became tattered and dirty, as he did not allow them to be removed for months. He did not want anyone other than himself to touch his daughters. Years later, Bruno returned to rescue his sister Nadia, who was now an adult. He successfully saved her, but Lydia remained in danger. Raymond confined her to the dark, damp attic, where he abused her multiple times a day. She felt betrayed by her siblings for leaving her behind. She tried to escape from home several times, but Raymond spread rumors that she was mentally ill. So every time she tried to contact the authorities, they immediately brought her back home. After another escape attempt, Raymond even chained her up to keep her from fleeing again. When Lydia turned 18, Raymond decided it was time for her to have children. He was so determined to make this happen that after each intimate encounter, he would tie her legs together to supposedly increase the chances of her getting pregnant. At 19, she became pregnant for the first time, and for almost the entire 9 months of her pregnancy, she was kept on a leash. This was to prevent her from having an abortion. She gave birth to her first child on December 8, 1982. Despite becoming a mother, Lydia continued to try to escape, but Raymond caught her repeatedly and punished her harshly. On one occasion, he locked her in the attic for 6 months. During this time, she suffered abuse from Raymond and Lucienne, who often used kitchen utensils as weapons. The only companions she had were rats. She went on to have 5 more children between 1986 and 1996. Her youngest child, a boy named Rudy, is not Raymond's but someone else's, conceived while she was trying to escape. Raymond took great pride in his children, who initially did not even know who their real mother was. Neighbors, grocery store owners, and authorities representatives all came to congratulate him on having a large family and pay their respects. Every time Lydia was ready to give birth, Raymond would take her to a hospital outside the border. There, with threats to kill her, he would force her to say that he was her husband and the father of her children. He was skilled at manipulating and she felt powerless to resist him. It all ended in 1997. 999. Raymond, who was diabetic, began to suffer serious health issues due to his neglect of his well-being. One day, his condition deteriorated, resulting in the amputation of several toes on his left foot. After the surgery, he continued to ignore the doctor's advice, and his health condition worsened. One day, Lydia visited Raymond in the hospital and learned that he had died the night before from a pulmonary embolism. This news brought her to tears, as she seemed to forget all the pain he had caused her. Before the death of the man who had abused her for a long time, she could not understand why she felt so sad. As Lydia left the hospital, she recalled how Raymond once forced her to promise that she would end her life immediately after his death. Years of his control had deeply affected her mindset. She walked to the nearest bridge and, in a moment of despair, jumped into the river. After she fell, she lost consciousness. Then, rescuers had pulled her from the water. In that moment, she realized that the horrors of her past were finally behind her. Thus, the 28-year saga of bullying, sexual assault, and imprisonment ended. She was free at last. After Lydia was released, she faced many challenges. As an illiterate and unemployed young woman, she needed to rebuild her life. She also had to reconnect with her children, who had been raised by Raymond and Lucienne without any contact with her. Fortunately, after years of neglecting the issue, the authorities began to support her. Initially, she was allowed to stay in the house where she had been held captive, although she was too afraid to go into the attic, the site of her abuse. Lydia's stepmother, Lucienne, who was 68 at the time, went to trial in 2007. She received a 3-year suspended sentence for failing to stop the crimes committed by Raymond. In 2008, this sentence was appealed and increased to 4 years probation. Lydia bravely shared her story with everyone. Despite still being illiterate, she collaborated with journalists and writer Jean-Michel Radem to publish a book about her difficult journey to freedom. In her book, Lydia criticized many government agencies. According to her, during the days when she escaped, they made her fall back into a bad situation without trying to understand the situation. She was especially critical of her stepmother, Lucienne, who not only ignored her suffering, but also actively participated in the physical abuse. She also criticized Bruno, Nadia, and medical workers who treated her injuries from burns, bruises, and cuts. She claims that medical staff ignored the obvious signs of her mistreatment and chose to remain uninvolved. Additionally, she criticizes her neighbors for not contacting any social services despite hearing the daily screams of children. Finally, Lydia expressed her disappointment with the French justice system for going easy on Lucienne. After publishing her book, the public became aware of the horrors she endured. Though some people advised her against sharing her story, she firmly believes that victims of such crimes should share their experiences, as it may help protect others. After gaining her freedom, Lydia met Sylvain Skurla. He seemed to come into her life to help heal her from the pain she had suffered. Shortly after they met, they got married and had 2 children. She expressed that she found hope in her husband and began to embrace life again. She participated in several media interviews and documentaries about her experiences, with Sylvain always by her side. However, the indelible traces of her time in captivity still remained in her heart. The scars on her body were a reminder of her past and the struggles she had gone through. With the help of a lawyer, Lydia appealed to the Judicial Commission for compensation. In her appeal, she detailed the torture and abuse she endured from Raymond and Lucienne, as well as her lack of access to education, which hindered her ability to find work. Additionally, she was not registered in the Social Security system because she could not write, preventing her from completing necessary forms. She also mentioned that burns she suffered as a child resulted in a degree of disability. Therefore, it was essential for Lydia to achieve several goals. First, to have her status as a victim recognized. Second, to receive financial assistance from the state to buy a home, ensuring she would never return to the place where she was tortured. On November 16, 2009, the Victims' Compensation Commission awarded Lydia over $100,000 in compensation. Her children, whom she had with Raymond, also received financial support. It was reported that they all found stable jobs, rebuilt their lives, and started their own families. Now, at 61 years old, Lydia has had a long and challenging journey to achieve a happy life. She needed specialized treatment for her emotional and physical scars for many years. However, with Sylvain's support, she was able to begin again. Despite everything she has gone through, she remains a strong and cheerful woman. Later, Lydia re-established communication with Bruno and Nadia. However, she admits that she still feels anger towards Bruno for not taking her with him. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Jorge Torres. Is there anything more horrific than a father murdering his own child? In the investigation and trial of crimes, mistakes in identifying the culprit can have dire consequences. One of the most heartbreaking situations is when an innocent person is wrongfully punished while the real culprit continues to be at large. This was on Mother's Day, when 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and her best friend, 9-year-old Crystal Tobias, decided to go for a short bike ride. They were expected to return within an hour, but vanished without a trace. Family members spent nearly the entire night looking for them. In the early morning, Laura's father, Jerry Hobbs, found her bike while climbing the hill, but Laura was still missing. The search for she and her friend continued. A couple of hours later, a few hundred meters from the bike, Jerry discovers suspicious figures lying motionless on the ground in the dim light of early morning. He quickly realized something was wrong. When they reached the scene, he discovered the bodies of Laura and her best friend Crystal, who had multiple stab wounds. It was clear that their deaths were brutal and prolonged. Sadly, this tragedy happened close to their home. Both girls lived in the small town of Xene, Illinois, which has a population of 20,000. Their deaths deeply affected the local community, sparking a desire among residents to uncover the truth and the cruel criminal responsible. However, it's difficult to uncover the full story. The police came under intense public pressure. So, they worked hard to gather any information that could help them inform the community and capture the perpetrator. A few days after the tragedy, the commander of the task force at the Lake County Major Crimes Department confirmed that has a suspect. Detectives had already spoken with Jerry. They think he is involved in the case. He was brought in for questioning on the day the bodies were discovered. The police noted that Jerry had been acting strangely. A background check revealed that he had been released from a Texas prison just a month prior. Overall, he had a significant history of legal troubles. Although Jerry had repaired his relationship with his daughter, could he handle the situation involving her and her friend? The girls were discovered lying next to each other, having been raped. The scene was horrific. Both had suffered multiple stab wounds and had been beaten. A forensic expert identified a total of 31 cuts from a blade, primarily on the upper body, chest, and neck. The injuries were similar for both girls. Laura had defensive wounds, suggesting she fought back in desperation. There was reason to believe that the killer intentionally caused maximum pain to his victims, targeting areas that would prolong suffering rather than lead to immediate death. Jerry firmly denied any wrongdoing. Consequently, he was questioned for hours by law enforcement officers who sought to piece together the events leading to the deaths of the two victims. After a lengthy interrogation, the detectives managed to obtain a confession, which was captured on video. Jerry said he and his wife Sheila returned home on Sunday around 3 o'clock. At that time, their 4 children were flying kites by the lake. Their daughter Laura asked her parents if she could go for a bike ride with a friend, mentioning that it was Mother's Day and she wanted to celebrate it with a festive ride. Even though Laura was still under house arrest for taking $40 from Jerry, Sheila chose to let her go. Jerry disagreed with Sheila, believing that Laura should complete her punishment to understand her mistake. However, Sheila convinced him, and Jerry decided not to interfere, he wanting to ensure that both Laura and Sheila had a nice Mother's Day. Laura was allowed to go for a walk and was expected to return in an hour. However, she did not come back on time. Initially, her parents thought she and her friends had lost track of time while enjoying themselves and would return soon. But as evening approached and Laura still hadn't arrived home, their concern grew. The path through the park was short, and it usually took about 20 minutes to walk. Given that she had been gone for several hours, her absence became increasingly worrying. Jerry decided to investigate. He planned to search for his daughter along the path and intended to discipline her for disobeying, so he set off down a dirt road. Jerry encountered Laura and Crystal, who were playing and ignoring their parents' requests. Upset, Jerry insisted it was time for his daughter to go home and said he would punish her. He wanted to take Laura home and told Crystal to go back as well since her parents were waiting for her. However, neither girl was willing to leave on their own. Jerry then turned to Laura and said they were leaving because she was too caught up in her play. Laura reacted by getting upset, and Jerry grabbed her hand. She resisted and screamed to be let go. Crystal also pleaded with him to release her friend and leave them alone. Both girls started to be disrespectful and rude to Jerry. When Jerry refused to let go of Laura's hand, Crystal pulled out a small switchblade and insisted that he release her. In a moment of confusion, Laura bit her father's hand, which made him angry. He struck her in the face, causing her to fall to the ground. Crystal then lunged at him, but he easily took the knife away from her. Once he had control, he hit Crystal in the face, and she also fell. Furious, Crystal stood up and attacked Jerry, but he responded by stabbing her in the chest several times. Afterward, he approached Laura, who was desperately trying to defend herself, but she was no match for him. He struck her in the face again, and then stabbed her multiple times with the knife. Jerry's statements were collected after 24 hours of interrogation. The police believed they had caught the real criminal. He detailed the brutal aspects of the attack, information only the perpetrator would know. Despite his confession, it was hard to accept that a father could harm his own daughter and her friend so viciously. The detectives were particularly suspicious due to Jerry's criminal history. Born in 1970, Jerry Hobbs dropped out of school after 8th grade. He was known for his hot temper, which often led him into trouble. His criminal career began soon after school, with significant offenses occurring in 1990, when he first served several months in a Texas state prison. After that point, he was released but then re-imprisoned, typically for petty offenses. The list of criminal activities included possession of illegal substances and multiple assaults on individuals for theft. There were serious underlying issues that contributed to these crimes. In August 2001, Jerry attacked his wife while they were living in a trailer. The situation escalated into physical violence. 3 neighbors attempted to intervene, but Jerry, in a fit of rage, grabbed a chainsaw and chased them around the trailer park. He only stopped when one of the men struck him in the back with a shovel, causing him to fall and become incapacitated. By that time, the police had been called, and they arrived shortly after to take control of the situation. In December 2002, he was convicted and received a suspended sentence. However, he failed to report to his probation officer, leading to the revocation of his probation. In October 2003, he was sent to prison, where he served 18 months. He was finally released in April 2005. After his release, he took a bus to Zane. He visited Sheila's parents' house, where he reunited with Sheila and their 4 children. Laura and her 2 brothers were from Jerry's relationship with Sheila, while her eldest child was from her previous marriage. Jerry put aside past grievances and hoped to rebuild their relationship and live together as a family again. Jerry spent a lot of time reflecting over the past year and a half, dreaming of starting a new life. Despite the challenges in their relationship, Sheila genuinely loved Jerry, and they decided to give their relationship another chance. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Just a month after they reunited, a tragic incident occurred. One day began positively, with children riding bicycles and roller skates along the forest path. Many families were having barbecues, making the area lively and seemingly safe. There had never been any incidents in the past, and parents often allowed their children to explore on their own. It was puzzling that no one seemed to have heard anything. There were no witnesses to the double murder. After Jerry confessed, the police arrested him, and he was held in custody without bail for over 2 years while the prosecution prepared for trial. During the investigation, several strange inconsistencies came to light. Investigative agency found it hard to believe that the 8- and 9-year-old girls had a knife and attacked him, prompting him to fight back and ultimately kill them in a moment of anger. Additionally, it was odd that the girls refused to go home after their father found them walking alone in the dark. Were the schoolgirls really not afraid to be outside at that hour? All of this seemed absurd. In his confession, Jerry did not mention anything about rape, even though the girls had experienced sexual violence at the crime scene. Forensic evidence later uncovered more details about the terrible events that occurred that day. Scientists found male DNA samples, but these did not match Jerry. Instead, they belonged to an unidentified man. Despite this evidence, investigators proposed their own explanation. However, they did not explain how male DNA could be found on the girls, making their reasoning seem even more questionable. The charges indicate that it was a serious case. They had Jerry's confession and his criminal background, so winning in court seemed like a formality. Details about the DNA evidence were not revealed. The video recordings of the interrogations were sufficient to persuade the jury. As a result, Laura's father was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2009, a significant change occurred in Arlington, Virginia. Amanda Snell, a 20-year-old servicewoman, lived there. On July 13, 2009, she failed to report for her shift at Fort Myer, raising concerns among her supervisors. Amanda was typically responsible and committed to her career, so not showing up for duty without notice was out of character for her. To check on her well-being, management sent several colleagues to her dormitory. They knocked on her door, rang the doorbell, and attempted to reach her by phone, but received no response. When they found her door unlocked, they entered the room. The first alarming sign was that her wallet and ID were untouched. The military quickly discovered blood and signs of a robbery in the bedroom. Amanda's body was found in the closet. She had been severely beaten, and a cord from a household appliance was still tied around her neck, with a pillowcase over her head. Investigators determined that she had died about 2 days before her body was discovered. Numerous pieces of evidence were collected from the crime scene, including a sample of the pillowcase. The police noted that her laptop, phone, and bed sheets were missing, and they found several footprints in the room, suggesting that another person had been present. Since the base was secured against outsiders, this indicated that the perpetrator likely lived or worked there. Forensic experts identified the shoe prints as Nike Air Force One, which were very popular on the base at the time, providing no leads for the police in their search for the suspect. Months went by. On February 27, 2010, another attack occurred just 5 kilometers from Amanda's workplace in Arlington. In the early hours of the morning, 2 female postgraduate students were returning from dinner when a man confronted them at the entrance of their building. He threatened them with a weapon, forced them inside, and followed them with his gun drawn. He bound their hands with electrical cords and ordered one of them to get into his car. He then drove her to a remote area outside the city, where he raped her. The attacker strangled her until she lost consciousness and left her to die in a wooded area covered in snow, not considering that she might survive the assault. The girl regained her senses and made her way to the nearest road, where a motorist found her and offered help. He stopped and called emergency services. The student, suffering from hypothermia, was taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, her friend had also contacted the authorities. Fortunately, they did not find any immediate danger. After being discharged, she spoke with the police and provided valuable information to the investigators. The most significant breakthrough was her detailed description of the attacker and his car. She described him as a short, smooth-skinned Hispanic man who drove a silver car. Detectives quickly recognized that the handwriting matched that of the criminal who attacked Amanda. Additionally, the police had obtained DNA from the person who attempted to take the girl's life. That her miraculous rescue would set off a series of events that would significantly impact many lives. Later that evening, officers collected a DNA sample from Amanda's. In the car described by the girl, they discovered the university ID of the kidnapped girl along with her earring, which helped establish a connection between the main suspect and the attack. The main suspect has since been taken into custody while awaiting trial. Several months went by as the police worked to understand the details of these disturbing events. Eventually, the DNA sample was analyzed and matched with the National Criminal Database. Law enforcement officials were taken aback by an unexpected discovery. The DNA found on the bodies of Laura and Crystal, who were murdered in 2005 in Zane, matched that of this suspect. At the time of the girls' murders, the suspect, Jorge Torres, was just 16 years old and lived in Zane. The police were further shocked to find out that he was a friend of Crystal's older brother. This investigation into the brutal attack revealed a shocking miscarriage of justice. Jerry, the father of Laura, was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. After spending many years in prison, Jerry began to show significant changes in his behavior. 2 weeks after DNA evidence linked Jorge to the crime, police identified the true killer of the two schoolgirls. The charges against Jerry were dropped, and he was released from prison in early August 2010. After the murders of the schoolgirls, Jorge was not apprehended and graduated from high school in 2006. Just a few months later, he enlisted in the Marines. The investigation revealed then he had boasted about being part of the Marines, an important unit of the U.S. Armed Forces. But this did not help his criminal image. He remained a ruthless monster and continued his violent actions. Now, it was necessary to examine his potential involvement in other attacks. When in prison, Jorge was still scheming and manipulating events. But the manipulative tactics Jorge used could no longer be hidden. Alongside the DNA testing, additional evidence was necessary to prove his involvement in the murder of the schoolgirls. To gather this evidence, authorities decided to recruit informants from among the prisoners in exchange for reduced sentences. A suitable informant was chosen. He was a former restaurant owner convicted of financial crimes and had no prior violent crime record. He willingly agreed to cooperate with the police. During a week in August 2010, he was approached to communicate with Jorge. This person said, in his confession, Jorge stated that he entered Amanda's apartment in the early morning with the intention of robbing and assaulting her. When Amanda woke up and saw him, he took advantage of her shock, tying her hands with a wire and wrapping a cord around her neck because he feared she would recognize him and report him to the police. Jorge claimed that she had no time to fight back. He coldly detailed how he assaulted Amanda while she was suffering, and then concealed her body in a closet to delay its discovery. The informant reported that Jorge spoke about his actions with a sense of pride, almost bragging, make law enforcement officers were shocked. Jorge's behavior indicated possible psychopathic traits, as individuals with such disorders often seek admiration. Following this confession, the police chose to reopen Amanda's case. They discovered that Jorge was a colleague of Amanda and lived directly across the hall from her. In his room, officers found a gun and a computer containing numerous graphic videos of the rape and torture of women. Additionally, Jorge was wearing Nike Air Force One sneakers that matched the shoe prints at the scene of Amanda's murder. Forensic scientists started re-examining samples from the pillowcase found on Amanda's head and from the bedsheet. DNA testing eventually revealed a match, adding one more victim to the list of crimes linked to this dangerous criminal. Although detectives believed he might be involved in other similar offenses, they found no evidence to support this. The police were left with a serious threat to society who had been free for years. It was finally time to pursue justice. The trial of the case in which the graduate student victim survived the attack began in December 2010. The defendant was found guilty of several charges, including kidnapping, rape, and attempted first-degree murder, and was sentenced to life in prison. This was just the beginning of multiple trials. The trial for the murder of Amanda Snell began in 2014, after prosecutors presented Jorge's recorded confession and DNA evidence. The jury unanimously supported the prosecution. In late May of that year, the judge sentenced Jorge to death. In mid-November, he was extradited to Lake County, Illinois, to face trial for the murders of Laura and Crystal. Although the attacker had already been sentenced to death, the state attorney believed it was essential to conduct hearings to honor the victims and their families. The trial started in mid-September 2018. Jorge opted for a plea deal, giving up his right to a trial and admitting to the intentional murders of 2 schoolgirls. He received a 50-year prison sentence for each murder, but his life sentence was already revoked. He returned to a Virginia prison to await the death penalty while his appeals were under review. The death penalty was abolished in the state in 2021, so Jorge is now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. One key question remains: why would the biological father of one of the murdered schoolgirls take the blame for this terrible crime? In 2005, Jerry briefly explained his reasoning to his mother, stating that he had been broken by the police during interrogation. Later, after his release, he shared more details with journalists. He revealed that he had not slept for over a day and was actively searching for his daughter with Crystal's father when he learned of her death. Overwhelmed by shock, he was confused and in pain, and the police exploited this vulnerability during the lengthy interrogation to extract his shocking confession. Human rights activists claimed that Jerry faced constant pressure from law enforcement, who used various tactics to force him into a confession. As a result of their actions, Jerry lost 5 years of his life in prison. After these events, the man decided to seek compensation for moral damages because he now knows that the police deliberately ignored the most valuable evidence that confirmed his innocence and locked him up instead of looking for the real killer. DNA samples obtained after the rape clearly showed that Jerry was not involved in the crime, yet law enforcement chose not to pursue the real culprit and continued to charge him. Now, it took multiple crimes being committed for the truth to finally come to light and for an innocent man to be set free. During the recent press conference regarding this incident, the state attorney addressed the media. He made efforts to downplay the situation and stressed that no one obstructed the detainees' access to legal counsel. He claimed that the detainees' rights were fully respected during questioning. According to him, Jerry's own behavior raised suspicions, and his past criminal record further damaged his credibility, leading the police to suspect his involvement in the girls' deaths. Detectives believed he had knowledge relevant to the case and continued to press him for answers. But Jerry maintained that this was merely an unfortunate coincidence. A few hours into the interrogation, the police took away Jerry's clothes, claiming they needed to analyze them. Instead, they gave him a thin suit that left him cold. They repeatedly showed him disturbing photographs from the murder scene and intimidated him with threats. Although Jerry consistently refused to confess, the police began threatening to arrest Sheila, suggesting that their children would be left without parents. He couldn't let that happen. To obtain a confession that could be used in court, they needed to record it on video. There was supposed to be no coercion or aggression from the officers, but many takes were necessary because Jerry initially refused to read the confession prepared by the investigator. Ultimately, the threats led him to comply with the detective's demands. In February 2014, the civil lawsuit of a wrongfully convicted man was resolved, resulting in an award of over $6 million. However, he does not view this as a true victory. He emphasizes the importance of the wrongful conviction, which led to reforms in Lake County's law enforcement system. He notes that while he was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, the actual killer continued to rape and murder other victims. Fortunately, that killer is now in prison and can no longer harm anyone. Police believe he is a serial killer, and it's likely that there were additional victims. An investigation into other cases of forced confessions revealed that 4 more innocent men were also wrongfully convicted. DNA evidence cleared them, but this crucial information was ignored by the Lake County prosecutor at the time. These 4 men spent a total of 75 years in prison and are now free. The case of Jorge Torres serves as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime and the long road to justice for victims and their families. Jorge's crimes, which include the brutal murders of Laura Hobbs and Crystal Tobias in 2005, as well as the subsequent murder of Amanda Snell in 2009, went unsolved for years, leaving a trail of pain and confusion in their wake. His eventual conviction, made possible by DNA evidence, not only exonerated Jerry Hobbs, who was wrongfully imprisoned for the murders of the 2 young girls, but also revealed the extent of Jorge's crimes. The case underscores the vital role that forensic science plays in ensuring justice and preventing wrongful convictions, and serves as a stark reminder of the necessity of thorough investigations in the pursuit of the truth. Thanks to the persistence of law enforcement and the power of DNA testing, justice was finally served, although the damage done to the lives and spirits of those affected remains irreparable. In 2016, 22-year-old Julia Enright was studying at the Massachusetts Medical College in the USA. At that time, she met a young man named Brandon Chicklese, who was 18. Brandon was a technology student, fulfilling his dream of becoming a heating and ventilation technician. Julia and Brandon were completely different from each other. Julia dressed and behaved as differently as possible, whereas Brandon dressed modestly and was kind and calm. Brandon grew up surrounded and cared for by his parents. He had been a Boy Scout for over 10 years, was described by those who knew him well as responsive and open. When he and Julia started dating, their union seemed like a real attraction of opposites. Gradually, they began an intimate relationship, and Julia involved Brandon in unusual forms of intimacy. Given their age, it was not easy to find privacy for such experiments, so Julia suggested using a treehouse owned by one of her friends. The house was abandoned and located in a wooded area just a few kilometers away from the suburban homes where Julia was born and raised. Over time, the owner stopped visiting the secluded place, and Julia began to use the house freely. She decorated her improvised shelter with chains and other paraphernalia, turning it into a base for their experiments. Her collection of unique objects began to form there. By the time Brandon first visited this place, an eerie atmosphere pervaded it, inspiring dark thoughts. However, he tolerated the oddities of his girlfriend, and they regularly met there. But as their relationship developed, Brandon increasingly felt that they were not right for each other. Eventually, he realized that further development of their relationship was impossible. Brandon suggested breaking up and remaining friends. Julia agreed. It seemed that both of them calmly separated, demonstrating emotional maturity. In 2018, Brandon lived with his parents in the small town of Rindge, New Hampshire. He had obtained the qualification for which he had studied and worked so long, becoming a heating engineer. He started dating another girl and was preparing to celebrate his birthday in July. It seemed that, despite his young age, he had managed to achieve something significant. He had an education, a stable job, and a relationship with a girl. He sincerely told his family that he felt happier than ever. Shortly before this period, Brandon thought he had gained the necessary experience and was ready to open his own business in heating systems. He began to take action, and everyone gave him great support for this initiative. Relatives, friends, and his girlfriend all recognized that Brandon was just the type of person who could successfully run his own business. Unfortunately, it was not destined for him to realize these dreams. On June 23, 2018, Brandon left home to visit relatives in Windham, New Hampshire. For this, he had to travel about 80 kilometers, just over an hour's journey. He left home at around 1 p.m., but he did not return to his relatives by evening. Any attempts to contact him were ignored. His family, girlfriend, and grandmother were understandably panicking. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Brandon. His mobile phone was turned off, a situation he had never experienced before, as he had a busy schedule and could receive calls from new clients at any moment. Unfortunately, in order to contact the authorities to report a missing person, they had to wait at least a day. On the morning of June 24th, Brandon's parents went to the police station. They presented their arguments in detail and were very worried because Brandon was not prone to spontaneous parties or meetings with friends, did not suffer from any mental problems. Generally should not have disappeared anywhere. Law enforcement began to search for traces of Brandon in Windham. However, despite their efforts, they could find no evidence that he had even reached the city. There were no traces of his car, including on recordings from CCTV cameras. Brandon did not buy anything in Windham, did not pay for gas with his card, and did not use his phone. In this state of having no leads, 5 days passed. Family members searched for him, but increasingly, the thought that they would not see their loved one again haunted them. Finally, on June 29th, a gray Honda Civic was found in the parking lot of the Hannaford supermarket on Route 202 in Rindge, New Hampshire. It was Brandon's car. It was unclear how the car appeared there, especially since it was unlocked and the keys were left in the ignition. This only strengthened the suspicion that something terrible had occurred. Brandon would never have treated his property this way. Such methods are often used by criminals to provoke the theft of a vehicle, leaving fingerprints behind to set up innocent people. During this time, relatives continued their search, distributing, pasting flyers throughout Brandon's hometown and the surrounding area. Unfortunately, all these efforts were in vain. On July 10, 2018, a random runner training in a forested area in Rindge made a horrifying discovery just 10 kilometers from the shopping center where Brandon's car was found. He located a human body, which was hidden in the bushes only tens of meters from the side of the highway. The remains of the young man were wrapped in tarpaulin, and his hands and feet were bound with tape. Given the condition of the body at the time of discovery, most of the flesh had rotted away, exposing the bones. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they immediately stated that this method of hiding the body was not chosen by chance. In fact, such extensive decomposition is an extremely effective way to get rid of evidence in the shortest possible time. Autopsy results showed the victim was Brandon Chicklese. It was believed that the detectives were dealing with a fairly experienced killer who knew how to evade justice. The perpetrator probably carefully studied related materials, and perhaps this was not his first crime. Suspicion only increased when investigators managed to find the shirt that Brandon had been wearing. It had several distinct cuts, apparently from a knife. Judging by this item of clothing, the victim had been stabbed 12 times. Unfortunately, The forensic expert could not confirm all of these wounds due to the body's condition. Perhaps they were more due to the high degree of decomposition. Thus, the expert could only speak with certainty about the traces left on the bones. For the same reason, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death. It was possible that Brandon was tortured, but proving or disproving such guesses turned out to be impossible. No matter how hard the investigators tried, they were unable to find his mobile phone. It was apparently destroyed or discarded. Since the moment of Brandon's disappearance, they could not connect to his means of communication. This only confirmed the idea that the crime was committed by an experienced killer who knew that any information carriers and means of communication were compromising. This strategy was effective, as the police could not even establish the route Brandon had taken before his death or after the murder. Fortunately, the detectives still had access to the list of calls from Brandon's mobile phone before it was turned off. When they received this information from the operator, they discovered that the last call before his disappearance and the switching off of his mobile phone was made near the home of his ex-girlfriend, Julia. Investigators assumed he could have visited her before leaving. As soon as the patrol officers arrived near Julia's house, they immediately suspected something was wrong. There was an unbearable smell of rotting flesh. Even more shocking discoveries awaited within the house. Officers found decomposing bodies of animals literally everywhere in the rooms. Outside, they were wrapped in tarpaulin, and inside, in various containers, there were BDSM kits, specific paraphernalia, knives, and related photos. In fact, this house became the most horrifying location in the memory of all the participants of the first encounter with Julia. Julia lived alone in her father's house. She worked as a phlebotomist in a clinical laboratory, dealing with blood, collecting it for analysis, and preparing samples. Given the respect that doctors receive in the USA, it was a rather esteemed profession. Julia was always a peculiar person. As it turned out, these quirks went far beyond the bounds of normalcy. Her work was not just a way for her to help people and earn a living, it became something much more. During the day, she worked as a phlebotomist, but at night, she turned into another person. She became quite famous in the escort industry, acting as a mistress. Her friends and acquaintances knew of Julia's BDSM fetish, which she openly discussed. She claimed that only willing participants were involved in her activities, insisting that it was a form of entertainment and that all clients left satisfied. However, none of her acquaintances suspected the dangers involved. Despite her fears and risks, she decided to take a big step, even posting an ad on a specialized website inviting everyone to engage in play involving knives and blood. According to the description, it was supposed to be BDSM domination, which involved lightly injuring the client and allowing them to bleed. This was a specific category of entertainment. There would always be clients willing to participate. Moreover, no one should care about what happens in someone else's bed if it is done by mutual consent. However, such activities always suspiciously resemble a front to cover up darker deeds or even a trap for naive partners. As it turned out, Julia had her own skeletons in the closet. She didn't just associate her life with blood, it was more akin to an obsession. In fact, she had a fascination not only with blood but also with dead flesh. She had a real collection of dead animals displayed in jars, among them large specimens like ravens. Additionally, almost constantly in her courtyard lay decomposing animal bodies, which she wrapped in tarpaulin to speed up decomposition from the heat and then used their bones for her artistic compositions. Despite the nightmarish aspects and especially the terrible smell, Julia perceived some sort of beauty in this and embodied it through her art. Unfortunately, her vision of beauty proved too perverse and cruel to earn her a place among artists. Moreover, Julia had a whole collection of vials filled with blood and used condoms. She was obsessed with serial killers. She once even described a kind of ritual in which she personally participated. When a whole group of people gathered, they acted out scenes with vampires and actually drank some of each other's blood. Despite these suspicious hobbies, Julia had friends and willingly demonstrated her creativity. She always claimed that she had no talent in art, but in this way, she expressed her vision of the world. In fact, time and time again, Julia showed her friends the remains of animals, which were laid out in specific patterns. Of course, most people were concerned about where she got all these bodies. To such questions, Julia always answered briefly that everything necessary for this so-called art was found in the forest or on the side of the road. Julia insisted that she did not harm living beings but found and used the bodies of dead animals. Considering that in everyday life she was very quiet and avoided conflicts, people believed that this was just an oddity. Apparently, Julia's inner circle didn't know about Jeffrey Dahmer. This infamous man once started with a similar fixation. He also collected dead animals and became obsessed with the study of remains. He described his passion as an alternative vision of the world or creativity. Like Julia, Dahmer surrounded himself with things of a frankly creepy nature, and naturally, this could not end well. Julia kept a detailed diary in which she described her life and her activities exploring her own psyche. It seemed she was not fully aware that her hobbies looked strange and provocative. She continued to view them as creative pursuits and spoke somewhat arrogantly about people who did not understand art and beauty. However, there were less philosophical notes in the diary. She described bloodthirstiness as a charming character trait and revealed her unhealthy attitude toward death. From the very first entry, she constantly talked about her obsessive desire to kill a person. Julia considered it the height of bloodthirstiness, a manifestation of insatiability, which excited and attracted her. Julia repeatedly mentioned that she was driven to this monstrous act by a certain hunger that arose with every thought of killing a person. All this frightening data was obtained during the investigation. The longer the police dug to understand who Julia was, the more shocked they became. For the detectives, it became obvious that they had encountered a potential serial killer. The biggest source of incriminating data was her mobile phone, which was taken for examination. As it turned out, shortly before Brandon's disappearance, Julia had met a new boyfriend named Jonathan Lind. They were both rather dark personalities, making them perfectly suited for each other. The night before Brandon's disappearance, immediately after the incident, Julia sent Jonathan a message containing the alarming phrase, "bloodbath." Detectives immediately noted that the treatment of Brandon's body was identical to the method Julia had used to accelerate the decomposition of animal remains. Even more unusual was the message sent to Brandon the day before his disappearance, in which Julia asked if he would come to visit her treehouse. The investigation established that a few weeks before her death, Julia was actively trying to improve her relationship with her ex since there were difficulties with the current girlfriend of Brandon. In fact, they were on the verge of breaking up due to her betrayal. Probably as a result of this, Julia managed to draw him in. In the end, he agreed to meet her at a kind of BDSM club, perhaps thinking of this visit to his ex as an act of reconciliation. Immediately after Brandon agreed to Julia's invitation, she wrote to her new boyfriend Jonathan that there was a surprise for him. By communicating with the neighbors of Julia, the police easily uncovered details of her intimate relationships and preferences. She openly shared this information with the entire neighborhood and seemed to even speak with pride about her activities in the intimate sphere. Gradually, the detectives came into possession of a business card on which she suggested playing with a knife and blood. There were witnesses who testified that Julia and her new boyfriend liked to cut each other during intimate. However, she herself would discuss it openly without the slightest embarrassment. When she ended up at the station for questioning, she laid out all the details. Surprisingly, after this conversation with Julia, the police officers let her go. She managed to convince them that despite her oddities, she was not involved in the murders and that there was no concrete evidence against her. According to Julia's confession, she truly intended to meet Brandon on that fateful day, but he never showed up. She sent him a message in the evening, but the guy never responded. Finally, one of the police officers decided to verify the information and found other messages from Brandon that Julia had not mentioned. Those messages made it clear that the former lovers had indeed met. This fleeting lie raised suspicions that the detectives had encountered a manipulative individual who needed to be further investigated. These guesses turned out to be correct. The more the police talked to Julia, the more she changed her story. Eventually, she admitted that she did meet with Brandon that evening. According to her, after a short conversation, he left to buy banned substances for the night. but the guy never returned and did not answer her calls, so she just went home. This also turned out to be a lie, as the guy did not use banned substances. After the lie was revealed, the detective spoke to the neighbors of Julia again, and they found out about the treehouse in the woods that Julia had turned into a BDSM headquarters. The officers focused on finding this hideout and managed to arrive there with her new boyfriend. It was obvious that the house had been thoroughly cleaned. There was even new furniture and a new carpet. Everything looked suspicious, as if someone had tried to cover up evidence of a crime. The carpet attracted the most attention. It looked out of place in this treehouse, as did the cleanliness, especially in sharp contrast to the chains and jars of blood and animal bodies. As soon as the carpet was lifted, it became evident that it was covering very large, washed-out blood stains. Similar traces were found under the floorboards. Blood also was on the steps and tree trunks. They had obviously tried to wash it off, but in vain, so they simply covered it with a carpet. It resembled a bloodbath. Judging by the number and size of these marks, it was clear that they were related to a deceased victim. Julia insisted that all these traces belonged to dead animals she had collected on the street. After searching the car, blood was also found there. Julia denied that Brandon was ever in the car or that they met in the treehouse on the day of the disappearance. However, DNA testing showed that she was lying, as most of the traces belonged to Brandon. As soon as the detectives presented this evidence, she changed her story again. Julia claimed that after her meeting with Brandon, they got very drunk. He went to get banned substances, and then they met in the treehouse. According to her confession, her ex-boyfriend attacked her, demanding intimate, but Julia resisted, justifying herself by saying that she had a new boyfriend. However, this did not help, as Brandon attacked and tried to abuse her. According to her, at that moment, she had no choice. Julia managed to reach for a knife, which she always carried on her belt. She claimed to have stabbed Brandon several times in self-defense. Afterward, Julia, in a state of shock, admitted that she could not even move from the spot, so she remained beside the wounded Brandon for about 40 minutes. During this time, he simply bled out. Julia did not call for help or contact the police. Instead, she turned to her boyfriend to ask for assistance in getting rid of the body. She did not want to go to jail for self-defense, believing that they would not believe her. By this point, investigators no longer believed a word she said. Additionally, the more than a dozen blows found only on the shirt were too much for self-defense. Her story about needing help from her new boyfriend was questionable, as he was known to be a sadist. It is unlikely that he was brought in solely to assist with getting rid of the body. Most likely, he also participated in the crime. However, no solid evidence was found. Julia ended her story by explaining how the body was wrapped in a tarpaulin and discarded off the highway. She insisted that the fabric was used only to disguise the remains. The police were convinced that she could have deliberately used a proven method to conceal human bones to fulfill her morbid fantasies. After all, maniacs are often prone to collecting items that remind them of their crimes. Julia's behavior did not resemble self-defense but clearly indicated an attempt to escape justice. Julia and Jonathan not only disposed of the body but also destroyed Brandon's mobile phone, attempted to eliminate traces of blood in the treehouse. They covered for each other when communicating with the authorities. There were no signs of struggle on Julia, and she was not morally traumatized by the events. Immediately after they disposed of the body, she and Jonathan simply went out for sushi. The detectives were finally able to confirm their suspicions after reviewing Julia's diaries. Judging by the last entries, she perceived Brandon's murder as a kind of gift for her new lover, who shared her peculiarities. Jonathan actively denied his involvement, insisting that he did not report the incident to law enforcement because Julia was scared and convinced him not to do so. She was absolutely certain that she would avoid punishment, as expressed in her diary in a rather crude manner. Additionally, Julia wrote that the torture and murder gave her body pleasure. It is evident that she would not have stopped there. In fact, each subsequent entry in the diary was more alarming than the last. The notes fully revealed the true nature of her interests. Julia repeatedly robbed graves and brought bones to add to her disturbing collection, which her boyfriend seemed not to be bothered by at all. In the first trial, Julia was charged with first-degree murder, and despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, she continued to insist that she was the victim of abuse. After her arrest, Jonathan, who was detained 2 weeks later, was charged with concealing evidence of a crime and perjury. He also did not admit guilt. Both were imprisoned and denied bail while awaiting trial. Julia's first trial was scheduled for November 2021. The prosecution insisted that the defendant planned Brandon Chiklis' murder as an act of togetherness and a way to fulfill her vicious desires. Julia easily managed to lure him into a trap by promising intimate. Presumably, she brutally dealt with Brandon, then enlisted her new boyfriend to help get rid of the body and the traces of torture. Julia's deviant interests exceeded all reasonable limits. Shortly before Brandon's murder, she went to a family planning clinic to have an abortion. The staff confirmed that she persistently requested to keep the fetus, even attempting to bribe the doctors to allow her to take the unborn child home. It is obvious that the fetus would have become another exhibit in her collection. Of course, the lawyer tried his best to whitewash the image of the defendant and her accomplice. However, considering all the accumulated evidence, this proved to be quite difficult. Their only tactic was to smear the name of Brandon. The defense attorney tried to argue that Brandon was an abuse and a cruel, aggressive person, but all of this sounded extremely unconvincing. When Julia spoke at the trial, she cried while recounting how she was attacked by Brandon. She claimed that she managed to defend her honor only after she stabbed him in the throat, but she could not explain why she inflicted many other wounds. Despite the desperate attempts of the lawyer to defend her, the prosecution successfully painted a truly horrific image of Julia. The jury was adamant and found Julia Enrights guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of second-degree murder, considering it an unintentional crime. In March 2022, the court announced the sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Upon hearing this decision, Julia burst into tears again, tearfully expressing that not a day goes by that she does not regret meeting Brandon. Julia never admitted guilt, calling the outcome of the trial a misunderstanding. Jonathan Lind, found guilty of giving false testimony, was sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 7 to 9 years. Born on May 20, 1998, in Louisville, Colorado, Ashley Doolittle discovered her love for horses at the age of 5. Growing up in a supportive family and following her dreams, she always aspired to be a role model in her community, like many other young girls. Ashley was raised by her parents, Anne Marie and Jeff Doolittle, along with her 2 brothers, Brandon and Michael. From an early age, her vibrant personality attracted people to her. By the time she was 5, she had her first pony, igniting a lifelong passion for horseback riding that became a key part of her identity. Her love for horses and the sense of community she found in this world gave her purpose. A few years later, at the age of 8, she began attending horse shows and immediately fell in love with the community atmosphere and rodeo lifestyle. She actively participated in rodeo events and achieved many accomplishments. In 2016, at around 18 years old, she was honored with the title of Lady-in-Waiting, a respected position in the rodeo community. This role involved assisting the rodeo queen and entailed various responsibilities, such as organizing fundraisers, supporting sponsors, attending community events, and representing the event as a spokesperson. Receiving this title was a great honor for Ashley, bringing her one step closer to her ultimate goal of becoming rodeo queen. Ashley became well known for her dedication to the rodeo community, and many teenage girls looked up to her as a role model. Young girls often asked Ashley for her autograph, and she always wrote personal letters to each one, encouraging them to pursue their dreams. In addition, she was actively involved in the Boulder County 4-H horse program, inspiring young children to participate in horseback riding. Ashley competed on various horse judging teams, participated in horse shows, and earned the title of Champion High Individual at the National 4-H Western Roundup. But Ashley had even bigger ambitions. She is a founding member and has served as vice president for 2 terms of the Thomas Valley FFA, the Future Farmers of America. FFA is an organization that supports individuals intending to enter and lead in the agricultural field. During her time there, she has been involved in many activities and plans to pursue FFA at the state level when she begins college. She graduated from Berthoud High in May 2016 and intended to attend Colorado State University, majoring in agricultural business. She looked forward to the next chapter of her life, unaware that it would be disrupted in a tragic way. Her life was devastated by one person, Tanner Flores, who believed that if he couldn't be with her, no one else should have her. Ashley met Tanner in high school, and their relationship seemed like a typical teenage romance to outsiders. However, they faced challenges. Tanner was controlling and dictated what she could and could not do. He even forbade her from attending college parties, which seemed absurd since Ashley was not the type to party. Was Tanner simply jealous of Ashley's accomplishments? Did he want to possess her completely? Was he insecure about losing her to someone better? Regardless of his motivations, Tanner frequently expressed his personal insecurities through his treatment of Ashley. After a year of dating, she realized he was not the right person for her and decided to break up with him. However, this decision was not easy for Tanner to accept. On June 4, 2016, he suggested they go hiking in Estes Park to discuss their relationship. Although Ashley tried to communicate that they were no longer together, Tanner mistakenly thought the conversation had gone well and believed they had reconciled. The next day, Ashley went out with friends to the Sundance Steakhouse, where Tanner unexpectedly showed up. Witnesses reported that he grabbed her, tried to turn her to face him, and attempted to talk, but she was done with his behavior and left. The next day, he convinced her to meet at Lon Hagler Reservoir to talk again. Despite her clearly stating that they were not back together, he somehow believed they had resumed their relationship. The day after that, Ashley returned to the Sundance Steakhouse and even reached out to Tanner, asking him not to come because she didn't want to see him. Tanner, however, made up a story saying he was locked out of his truck and needed her help. Ashley ignored his message. For days after their hike, on June 8, Ashley reluctantly agreed to accompany Tanner to sell some scrap metal, unaware that this decision would lead to a horrific incident in her life. On that day, Tanner checked Ashley's phone and found out that she had been texting 2 other guys, Tori and Jared. He suspected Ashley of flirting with them and accused her of being unfaithful, even though they were not officially in a relationship at the time. Later that night, he reached out to the 2 guys, which made Ashley very angry. He then sent her a text in which he expressed his hope that she realized what she had lost, stating that he had done everything for her and spent so much money. He warned her that he was going to do something reckless and then ended the message with a bye. Ashley tries to protect herself and still wants to maintain her friendship with Tanner, even though things have become tense. The next day, he messaged her again, asking if they could meet up and talk. She told him she was in Denver that morning but could meet later. While Ashley was in Denver, Tanner borrowed his dad's gun and went to shoot at Carter Lake, claiming it helped him relax. He continued to text Ashley throughout the day and even mentioned that he missed her. Frustrated, Ashley texted him to stop but still planned to meet him later because she didn't want to be rude. On the afternoon of June 9th, they met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, where Ashley got into Tanner's truck, unaware it would be the last thing she ever did. Around 7:30 p.m., her parents started looking for her since she hadn't come home. At 8 p.m., they found her car in a parking space at the reservoir. Both of her parents, Jeff and Ann, are confident that she will text them if she plans to come home late. Given this, they concluded that something wasn't right and immediately called the sheriff's office to report her missing. Local authorities quickly got involved and began their search. They contacted Ashley's friends and family for information. During this process, a name that came up repeatedly was Tanner. Authorities discovered that Tanner and Ashley had been in a relationship but had since broken up. They learned that Tanner was very upset about the breakup. One person mentioned that he posted a Snapchat message that raised concerns about his mental health, leading to fears that he might be thinking about ending his life. Many others interviewed by the authorities also noted that they had never seen Tanner this upset. Shortly thereafter, Tanner's father arrived and informed the officers that his .22 pistol was missing from the gun safe. He also stated that Tanner knew where the keys were located. Authorities issued a lookout alert for Tanner's truck and notified law enforcement across Colorado. The search was intensified, and by 8 a.m. the next day, they had located his position. Authorities received information that the truck had been seen at Tanner's grandfather's property in CB Bar, Colorado, which was about 5 hours away. Tanner's grandmother had called a neighbor to confirm the truck's presence, and upon verification, she reported it to the police. Due to the distance, organizing a team for an arrest would take some time, so authorities decided to send a wildlife ranger to the property to monitor Tanner and prevent his escape. Although Tanner did not attempt to flee, he engaged in disturbing behavior. The neighbor and the wildlife ranger witnessed him throwing blood-soaked rags into a nearby field and moving a roll-up mat behind the house. What happened next was horrifying. Tanner emerged from the house with a heavy blanket and placed it in the back seat of his truck. It was visibly heavy for him to carry, and a human arm was protruding from it. At this point, it was evident what Tanner had done. Fortunately, later that morning, he was arrested without incident by the sheriff's deputies, a CBI agent, and members of 3 other law enforcement agencies. When they opened the blanket in Tanner's truck, they discovered the body of Ashley. There was no way to save her, and her worst nightmare had come true. Tanner initially told the officers that he and Ashley were discussing their relationship in his truck when she lost control. He claimed that she had the gun, and while he was struggling to get it from her, it went off and accidentally killed her. He then stated that he shot her twice afterward to alleviate her suffering because the first shot did not kill her. After hearing this account, an officer expressed skepticism, and eventually, Tanner confessed the truth. Since Ashley had passed away by that time, Tanner was the only source for the details of the incident. He informed the officer that he and Ashley had met at Lon Hagler Reservoir, and then they drove west toward Carter Lake. This was the same lake Tanner had visited earlier that day to practice shooting. He mentioned that they talked about their relationship during their drive. Ashley expressed that she did not want to reconcile with him at that moment but saw the possibility of marrying him in the future. She needed time to explore other relationships. After this conversation, they began driving back to where Ashley's car was parked, but things took a dark turn. Tanner described how Ashley glared at him during the ride, which led him to reach into the back seat, grab the revolver, and attack her in the back of the head twice. He claimed that she did not die immediately, which is why he shot her a 3rd time, stating that it was meant to end her suffering. After that, he tried to clean her body as best as he could and drove to the land of his deceased grandfather in another part of the state. Once he provided his statement, he was taken to the Mesa County Jail without the option of bail. Ashley's funeral was held on June 17 at St. John Evangelist Catholic Parish in Loveland, Colorado. The ceremony was attended by over 700 people, including family, friends, and community members, all devastated by the tragic loss. The teenage girl, once a symbol of hope, happiness, and aspiration in the community, has now departed, leaving behind a profound sense of sorrow for everyone. Anne, Ashley's mother, expressed her wish for her daughter to be remembered for her vibrant life rather than for the way she passed away. She wanted Ashley's legacy to reflect the achievements of an energetic 18-year-old girl who had so much promise ahead of her. 18. Many people often feel confused about determining their life direction, such as their passions, careers, or college choices, because there are so many options. However, this was not the case for Ashley. In fact, she excelled in almost every field she participated in. That was her identity. While many young people struggle to figure out their paths at this age, Ashley had a clear vision for her future. Tragically, no one anticipated that her plans would be interrupted. People who attended her funeral described her as being fun, cheerful, and approachable. She was poised to become the rodeo queen the following year, but instead, she will be remembered during the upcoming season. Ashley had made significant contributions to her community, making her funeral a large and meaningful event. On that day, in addition to the ceremony, the FBI announced it would be joining Larimer County in the investigation to assist with evidence collection and search efforts. Tanner, who had previously been in Mesa County Jail, was moved to Larimer County Jail on the same day Ashley was laid to rest. The Ashley family was now beginning its pursuit of justice. On June 20th, Tanner appeared in court for the first time, facing charges of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. The kidnapping charge stemmed from the allegation that Tanner would not allow Ashley to exit the truck when she attempted to do so. Following Ashley's funeral, her family would endure ongoing grief and suffering, yet they would have to wait a year and a half for legal proceedings to begin. In October 2017, the trial began, with both Tanner and Ashley's family and friends in attendance. It was evident to everyone that Tanner had killed Ashley. The central question was whether the act was premeditated. The prosecution argued that the murder was planned, claiming that Tanner had gone to the lake earlier that morning to test the revolver and find a secluded spot for the crime. The prosecution also noted that the revolver used in the murder was a single-action firearm, requiring manual resetting after each shot. Given that Ashley was shot 3 times, they argued this demonstrated deliberate intent rather than a spontaneous act. The defense, on the other hand, contended that it was not a planned murder and suggested that second-degree murder would be a more appropriate charge. During the trial, Tanner took the stand and described the incident in detail. He admitted to what he had done but denied any intention to kill Ashley. New information emerged during his testimony that had not been included in his initial statement after his arrest. He revealed that he had disposed of both their phones after the murder, but not before texting himself from Ashley's phone, claiming they were not together that afternoon and that she would not meet him. This seemed like a failed attempt to cover his tracks. One shocking revelation came when he disclosed that the night before his arrest, he had broken into his deceased grandfather's home. Once inside, he cleaned up some blood, turned on the TV, and watched cartoons before going to sleep. This bizarre behavior raised a question: how can someone claim to love another person so deeply yet have the capacity to murder them and then watch television afterwards? This remains an unfathomable mystery. At the conclusion of the trial, both families were left devastated by their loss, mourning their children and the futures they had envisioned. While the verdict brought some measure of justice for Ashley, it also marked a grim end for Tanner. The anguish felt by both families was unbearable. Though justice was served, no true winners emerged from this heartbreaking situation. Both families were irreparably damaged in the process. The case highlighted a significant issue: dating violence in the United States. Each year, approximately 1.5 million high school students experience physical violence from an intimate partner, and 1 in 3 teens aged 14 to 20 in the United States experiences dating violence. Alarmingly, 81% of parents do not consider teen dating violence to be a serious problem. And Jeff Doolittle found that there was insufficient discussion about this reality, which sadly affected their daughter, as well as many other young people in the United States and beyond who face similar situations. In response, they established the Ashley Doolittle Foundation. This nonprofit aims to honor their daughter's legacy by giving back to the community as she once did. The foundation focuses on raising awareness and preventing teen dating violence, helping victims connect with appropriate support groups, launching school programs, and educating students and parents about the signs of dating violence. Ashley's mother emphasized that the foundation was created to keep Ashley's memory alive. She stated that they wanted something good to come from this through the Ashley Doolittle Foundation and that they wanted to prevent other families from experiencing what they went through. The story of Ashley serves as a serious reminder of the dangers that can exist in teenage relationships. While not every relationship mirrors the tragic events involving Tanner and Ashley, some do. It is crucial to recognize that violence, whether physical, verbal, or psychological, is unacceptable. Ignoring these issues can lead to severe consequences, as Ashley tragically experienced. Tanner Flores, the perpetrator, was found guilty of murder and second-degree kidnapping on October 4, 2017. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 32 years. Sharon Parker was born and raised in Florida, USA, in a family with several siblings, including 2 older brothers and an older sister. From a young age, she was very active, often attending concerts and participating in social events with her friends. Known for her stylish appearance, she always looked great. In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon became pregnant and married her longtime boyfriend, whom she had known since school. Their relationship appeared loving and had stood the test of time. After their wedding, they moved to Alabama for her husband's job, where Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Heather. Excited about motherhood, Sharon was eager to be the best mother possible, but her husband did not share her enthusiasm. After Heather's birth, their marriage began to deteriorate. Her husband struggled with the changes, feeling jealous of the time Sharon spent caring for their baby. This ultimately led to their divorce 3 years later. Sharon returned to Florida with Heather, where her family lived. She settled in Fort Myers, close to them, and focused on raising her daughter while working. The father was largely indifferent to the child, so Sharon tried to compensate for the shortcomings in her daughter's life. Initially, Sharon found work as an assistant accountant at a local hospital. Realizing she needed support, she sought a new partner who could be a father figure for Heather and help her have more children. This hope came to fruition when her mother introduced her to Gary Parker, a builder who was studying to become an engineer. Sharon felt an instant connection, describing it as love at first sight. They quickly began a romantic relationship and married a few months later. A year after their wedding, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Joshua. By that time, Heather was older and eagerly participated in taking care of her brothers, feeling proud to be an older sister and helping with their upbringing, especially when their mother was busy. The Parkers were a happy family. Gary is a good man. He always takes care of his wife's daughter and creates a loving environment for her. After the birth of their twins, Jacob and Joshua, their bond grew even stronger. They seemed to have the perfect family, enjoying barbecues on Sundays and camping in their backyard. It appeared as though they had a bright future ahead, filled with the joys of aging together and raising grandchildren. Unfortunately, their dreams would not come to fruition. Sharon was an excellent mother and a lively young wife who brought warmth and support to the family. As a homemaker, she managed the household while Gary worked to provide for them. They hadn't planned on having more children, but in the fall of 1989, Sharon announced that she was pregnant. They were overjoyed and eagerly anticipated the arrival of their new baby. On March 19, 1990, they welcomed a daughter named Julie. Sharon was thrilled, and Gary shared in her excitement. 10 days after Julie was born, the family planned a big celebration for their relatives and close friends. A large sign hung outside their house to announce that they had had another daughter. By this time, Jacob and Joshua were 6 years old, and Heather was already a high school student. Guests were expected to arrive on the evening of March 29, 1990. As usual, Gary and Sharon woke up that morning, took the kids to school, then Gary went to work while Sharon prepared for the party and cared for Julie. Jacob and Joshua were excited about the evening's events. Once their classes ended, they hurried home. However, as they approached the house, they found it unusually dark inside. Upon entering, they were met with an eerie silence. Their mother, Sharon, always greeted them at this time, often standing by the window to watch for them. She would help them take off their coats as part of their daily routine. So, when she didn't come out to greet them, the boys grew concerned. Initially, they thought she might be unwell and called for her, but there was no response. The boys began searching the house, and one of them soon spotted Sharon sitting motionless in a dark room. He called her name, but she remained silent. As they got closer, they touched her head, causing her to fall to the side. They saw that the right side of her head and face was covered in blood. Alarmed, they called for their baby sister, Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling distressed, the boys ran out onto the porch, uncertain about what to do next. Around the same time, 14-year-old Heather arrived home from school. She sensed that something was wrong when she saw her frightened twin brothers crying on the porch. They told her that their mother was in the house and hurt. Heather quickly went inside and was horrified to find Sharon, 33, lifeless in a chair with dried blood on her head. Frantically, Heather searched for Julie, but the baby was not there. Confused and panicked, she tried to call emergency services, but the home phone was disconnected. Leaving her brothers on the porch with instructions to stay put, she ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Initially doubtful, the neighbor ultimately called the police. Soon after, several police cars arrived at their home and began investigating the scene. After Heather called the police, she contacted Gary. He asked for time off from work and went home. Investigators found that the locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting that either Sharon knew her attacker and let them in willingly or that the attacker had a key. Sharon was attacked from behind at close range. The scene was particularly chilling, with her sitting in a chair, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees, making it appear as though she was conversing with someone. This posed position suggested that the murderer may have staged it intentionally. There were no signs of a struggle. It was clear that Sharon did not anticipate being shot, as she was facing away from the attacker. An additional concern was the disappearance of her baby, Julie, who had been born just 10 days before the murder. Forensic experts searched the crime scene quickly, knowing that time was of the essence. Every minute that passed increased the urgency to issue media announcements regarding the baby's whereabouts. Unfortunately, they only had a photograph of Julie to share with the public and authorities. When Gary returned to the house, he assisted the police in identifying any missing items. Strangely, they noticed that the holiday poster on the front of the house was gone. Apart from the poster and Julie, nothing of value was taken. Even Sharon's wallet was left untouched. This indicated that the murder was not a robbery. The Parker family is known for their kindness and friendliness, with no known enemies or criminal associations. They had no debts or problems, and it did not appear to be a random attack. It seemed to be motivated by personal reasons. The news of Sharon's murder deeply affected the twins, Jacob and Joshua. Until the last moment, they were hopeful that their mother was simply sick and would soon be released from the hospital. During this difficult time, the families of Sharon and Gary came together to support one another and seek justice. To gather more information, the police interviewed the closest neighbors of Sharon and Gary. A neighbor reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near Sharon's garage just before Jacob and Joshua returned home from school. She noticed that the truck was unfamiliar and appeared shabby, though she could not see the license plate. The neighbor then witnessed a woman getting out of the faded red car, carrying a grocery bag. The woman entered Sharon's house calmly, but her face was obscured by a scarf and sunglasses, making the creation of a composite sketch ineffective. This was the only lead the police had, and with no surveillance cameras in the area, it provided little assistance to the investigation. However, they managed to create a basic description of the white, dark-haired woman, which was quickly shared with the media. To gather more details, they used a poster designed for a holiday event. It was essential to talk to those close to Sharon and Gary, as the woman might have been part of a larger criminal scheme. Therefore, detectives were cautious about releasing Gary. He denied any involvement in his wife's murder, and there was no evidence to suggest he had a motive or opportunity, given that he was at work during the incident. Furthermore, Gary cooperated fully with the investigation and did not exhibit any suspicious behavior. Detectives discovered that Gary had a working relationship with a woman named Stephanie. They had taken several business trips together. Gary mentioned that just before the birth of their daughter, Stephanie seemed to become more involved with his family, behaving normally around his wife. Gary recalled that Stephanie visited their home a few days after Sharon was discharged from the hospital. On that day, their eldest daughter, Heather, expressed her dislike for Stephanie's presence, finding it suspicious. The adults dismissed Heather's concerns since she was only 14, but the police found her comment noteworthy. Is it possible that Stephanie kidnapped Julie out of jealousy? Although Gary and Stephanie worked closely together, they insisted there was no romantic involvement. Suspicion arose when a neighbor reported seeing her enter Gary's home, prompting detectives to investigate further. They interviewed Stephanie at the station. She appeared innocent and claimed she was with Gary in the office during the attack. Gary provided a detailed account of his activities on the day of Sharon's death, stating he was working until he received an urgent call from Heather. Witnesses indicated that there were no issues in Gary and Sharon's marriage. Gary described their relationship as harmonious and expressed happiness with their new baby. However, the police questioned why Gary owned a gun for self-defense. This gun was subjected to ballistic testing and did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, Gary remained a person of interest in the case. The interrogation lasted about 3 hours and did not raise any alarms. Experts determined that the only injury on Sharon was a gunshot wound to the head, indicating she was killed at close range. No DNA belonging to the killer was found under her fingernails. Meanwhile, a sketch of the suspect, based on a neighbor's description, was widely circulated in the media, resulting in around 100 tips to the police, most of which were deemed unreliable. However, one tip stood out. A woman named Peggy Mason came to the station, confidently claiming to know the identity of the perpetrator based on the police sketch. According to Peggy, she worked as a waitress at a restaurant with a co-worker named Craig Kirk, who had a wife named Betty. She recalled that the day before the crime, on March 28, Craig happily told her that Betty was pregnant and could give birth soon. He mentioned this but couldn't provide an exact date for the birth. The day after the tragedy involving Sharon, Craig and Betty had a child together. This could have been a coincidence, but there were many odd details that made Peggy suspicious. A week before the supposed birth, Peggy had seen Betty in the restaurant and noticed that she didn't appear to be pregnant. Her belly seemed fake. By that time, her pregnancy should have exceeded 43 weeks, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself without going to the hospital to induce labor, which seemed strange. When Peggy mentioned these concerns to Craig, he shrugged them off, citing rare cases where pregnancies can behave unusually. However, Peggy felt he was not being truthful. Right after Sharon's murder, Craig and Betty celebrated the birth of their baby, and Peggy, having been invited, attended the party. She was surprised at how quickly Betty and the newborn were discharged from the hospital and returned to normal life. Betty seemed at ease, almost as if she hadn't just given birth. As a mother of 3 herself, Peggy doubted that the child had been born just a day earlier. However, it was hard to confirm her suspicions since Betty kept the baby at a distance from the guests, refusing to show her and attributing her behavior to postpartum depression and medication. Towards the end of the party, Peggy managed to get close enough to the baby to inspect her more closely. She noticed that the baby had short hair, as if it had already been shaved, and the baby did not resemble either of its parents, Betty or Craig. When Peggy shared her suspicions with Betty, the woman became angry and quickly sent all the guests away, particularly upset with Peggy. She questioned where a newborn could come from. After seeing the sketch in the media and hearing about what happened to Sharon, Peggy began to connect the dots and suspected that Betty or Craig might be involved in the case. The detectives became interested in this new lead and decided to investigate Betty. She was previously unknown to the police, having been born in Florida on November 7, 1950. In her first marriage, she had 2 children, but her husband was very abusive. Betty escaped his control, filed for divorce, and gained sole custody of her kids. Unfortunately, she faced many challenges. In 1981, she lost custody of her sons due to her difficult financial situation, and the authorities placed them in foster care. Craig met Betty in 1982, and the year later, they began dating and eventually got married. However, despite their efforts, they remained in poverty and struggled to find happiness. Relatives and friends described their lives as a constant battle for survival. Craig worked long hours in a restaurant, and Betty attempted to find work, but she had dropped out of school due to an early pregnancy, which made it hard for her to secure a good job. They lacked stability and prosperity, but both tried hard to improve their situation. Betty desperately wanted to become a mother. She loved Craig and hoped they could have a child together, but despite trying for many years and even seeking medical help, they were unsuccessful. To fulfill her longing for motherhood, Betty worked in various child-related jobs, such as being a Girl Scout leader and performing as a clown at children's events. During this time, she had a minor legal issue when she forged a check, but she quickly resolved it by paying restitution, which meant there was no official record of the offense. For some time, it seemed that Betty and Craig had accepted that they might never become parents. However, Betty was increasingly anxious about possibly losing Craig to a younger woman who could have children. At the end of the year, she surprised her husband and friends with the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Betty appeared to be pregnant as her belly was growing. On the evening of March 29th, she returned home with a girl she named Laura. This seemed unusual because she had been discharged from the hospital right after giving birth. Now their family had grown to 3, and they shared their happy news with loved ones. Detectives went to the restaurant where Craig worked, but he was off that day. They found his home address and went to check if he was there. When Craig opened the door, he was visibly intoxicated and struggled to stay upright. He was confused about why the detectives had come to his home. The house was chaotic and unsanitary. The only clear thing Craig could communicate was that they had recently had a baby. He claimed he was celebrating this event, which was why he was drunk. Betty and baby Laura were also present. Betty confirmed that she had just become a mother and had returned from the medical center a few days prior. She stated that the baby was born in a hospital and that they were discharged immediately due to no complications. However, when questioned, she had difficulty remembering the name and address of the hospital. She eventually said it was a hospital on Michigan Avenue, but the detectives' investigation revealed that there was no maternity ward there. Additionally, she could not present a birth certificate, claiming it was lost in the mess around them. When investigators examined the baby, they noticed that the child did not resemble either Craig or Betty. Despite these inconsistencies, the detectives decided against detaining Craig and Betty, as they wished to handle the situation delicately to avoid escalating tensions. Meanwhile, an unmarked car, driven by a woman possibly connected to the situation, left the house while the police were merely observing the family. Shortly after the police left, Betty began causing trouble by carrying and packing items from the house and loading large boxes into her car. Investigators identified a faded red pickup truck that matched the description provided by a neighbor. Betty then got into the car and drove off, with detectives following her at a distance. They eventually decided to pull her over and inspect the vehicle. Inside, they found numerous boxes but no sign of the child. The detectives returned to Betty's home, where they discovered that the baby was with Craig. They considered this a danger to the child's safety and called in Child Protective Services to have the child taken away. Fortunately, the child was unharmed and was quickly taken to the hospital, where an examination confirmed her well-being. Meanwhile, Craig was brought in for questioning. He was surprised by the situation, expressing disbelief about the events. He claimed to have no knowledge of Sharon's case and believed that Betty couldn't be pregnant by him since their relationship had deteriorated and they hadn't been intimate for years. Craig thought his wife might have had an affair but had accepted the idea of her pregnancy and the baby. However, the investigation revealed a more troubling scenario. Craig possessed a pistol that was taken for analysis because the authorities suspected it might be the weapon used to kill Sharon. Despite this, ballistic tests did not confirm its involvement. Craig provided a crucial lead, mentioning that Betty owned a similar pistol of the same caliber, which was never found, suggesting it had been disposed of by her. After hours of questioning, Craig seemed to genuinely believe that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and showed little interest in knowing more. Medical tests later confirmed that the child was Julie, the kidnapped daughter of Sharon and Gary. During her interrogation, Betty was asked if she recognized Sharon Parker. She replied that she had seen Sharon on television and then confessed to killing Sharon. Betty met Sharon and her twins, Jacob and Joshua, while enjoying a day at the mall. They struck up a conversation, and during their chat, Betty revealed that she had recently experienced a miscarriage, a shared concern that connected her to Sharon. Betty mentioned that she was pregnant again and was seeking support. The police confirmed that Betty had indeed become pregnant in early 1989 but had suffered a miscarriage shortly after, which was likely devastating for her. Her marriage was struggling, and she was desperately trying to keep her husband, motivated by a strong desire for a child. Feeling a bond, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Later, Betty learned that Sharon had given birth to a baby girl. At that time, newspapers published the names of newborns, including the parents' contact information, making it easy for friends and family to send congratulations. This information helped Betty locate the Parkers' residence. She claimed she simply wanted to visit Sharon and congratulate her on the arrival of her new baby. When Betty arrived, Sharon recognized her and expressed joy. She handed Betty some money to buy groceries, which is why a neighbor saw Betty carrying a grocery bag near Sharon's house. However, when Betty entered the home and handed Sharon the groceries, the gun she carried for self-defense accidentally discharged, killing Sharon instantly. Betty stated she was in shock and initially considered fleeing but couldn't abandon the baby out of concern for the child's safety. She decided to take the baby with her, genuinely believing it was an accident and insisting that she should be released from custody. Naturally, Betty was arrested. Her account did not align with the crime scene or the reconstructed events. Soon after, she ceased cooperating with investigators and requested a lawyer. During a search of her home, authorities discovered numerous newspaper clippings featuring the names of newborns, specifically girls, indicating her troubling obsession with female infants. The investigation revealed that Betty had met some of these families, frequently introducing herself to medical professionals. However, her odd behavior raised suspicions, leading some to confront her and ultimately ask her to leave. Notably, prior to Sharon's case, she had not brought a firearm, which proved critical to the tragic outcome. In 1991, Betty's trial commenced. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Betty maintained that the shooting was an accident and declared her innocence. She attempted to portray her actions regarding the child in a positive light within her narrative, but no one believed her. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Betty Kirk guilty and sentenced her to life in prison, though she would be eligible for parole at the age of 103. It is unlikely she will ever be free again. The baby, Julie, was returned to her father, Gary Parker, and grew up in a loving home surrounded by her siblings. Gary committed himself to raising his children well, providing them with education and parental love. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979, in Baytown, Texas. Her childhood was challenging, as her parents, Pamela Sue Surratt and Anthony Paul Tony Walters, struggled with addiction, leading to an unstable home life. Tragically, she lost both parents to apparent overdoses by the age of 11. After their deaths, she was raised by her grandmother and later by her uncle, Jeff Walters. Despite these hardships, she was known for her vibrant smile, striking blue eyes, and uplifting personality. Crystal pursued a career as a flight attendant, where her adventurous spirit thrived as she traveled across the country. During her journey, she met Stephen Wayne McDowell, who was 7 years older than she. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his large stature, Stephen won Crystal's heart. They married in April 2007 after dating for a while. He had a daughter from a previous marriage and worked as a shipping manager, but he struggled to maintain stable employment, which forced Crystal to become the primary breadwinner. While she excelled in her career, Stephen's professional instability created tension in their relationship, especially concerning her frequent travels. As jealousy grew, Stephen began to suspect Crystal of having affairs during her flights, despite the lack of evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal valued her family and sought stability, given her difficult past. In 2016, after 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she decided to leave and join her family's real estate business. This shift allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of stability. Her uncle Jeff was proud to welcome her into the third generation of their real estate legacy. Crystal quickly excelled in her new role, being recognized for her charm, professionalism, and dedication. However, she confided in close friends that this career change also served a strategic purpose, as she believed it would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, Crystal's marriage had deteriorated significantly, prompting her to file for divorce due to years of emotional distress. On March 20th, she called 911, claiming Stephen had threatened her and their children. The authorities responded but treated the case as a precaution rather than a criminal incident. At that time, there were no custody arrangements, allowing Stephen to legally be with his children. Although officers attempted to contact him, they were unsuccessful. A few days later, Stephen returned the children, and Crystal chose not to press charges, opting instead to focus on reducing tension for the sake of their kids. Crystal's friends commented that she tried her best to keep the divorce amicable, putting the happiness of her children first. Stephen's adult daughter was troubled by this incident and questioned her father about his behavior. He expressed anger over alleged affairs that Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that those close to her dismissed as false. Many who knew them recognized that their relationship had been toxic for years, and even Stephen's daughter acknowledged that, while she and Crystal had a great relationship, the marriage had always been unstable. Although their divorce was finalized in June 2017 and appeared to be friendly, especially since Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while renovating her own, issues beneath the surface remained unresolved. Crystal often asked her family not to mention their plans or outings to Stephen, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Even simple activities, like spending time with a friend, could set him off. Despite being legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept the situation. His social media activity displayed a concerning trend. Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile picture to a tombstone, then to an image of Santa Muerte, and later reverted to a photo of himself with Crystal. His post suggested an image of a happy family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to emotionally support Stephen, checking in on him regularly. He claimed to be adjusting to the separation and focusing on his life, but his behavior suggested otherwise. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted pictures of himself bringing Crystal coffee in bed, as if their relationship was still going strong. In an effort to maintain a harmonious co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a trip with Stephen and the kids, but their intimacy only blurred the lines further. Then, in August 2017, things shifted. Crystal, now 37, met Paul Hargrave, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charming, ambitious, and shared Crystal's passion for travel and adventure. Their relationship developed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, Crystal felt truly happy. Although she wanted to tell her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it a secret until she found the right time to inform Stephen, still fearful of his reaction. However, that fear didn't stop her from publicly sharing her happiness. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never felt so joyful and that her heart was filled with a happiness she never thought possible. Just 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey approached. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and fulfill her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had collected clean water for the kids and informed him that she was heading to his house to take shelter with them. She intended to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras recorded the last known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels, holding her phone, as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's Uncle Jeff became worried. They were close, working together in real estate and communicating frequently. He tried calling her several times to let her know that a scheduled showing had been canceled because of the storm. When she didn't answer, Jeff contacted Stephen, who sent a suspicious text, allegedly from Crystal's phone, at 9:30 a.m., stating that she planned to pick up the kids and go to Dallas. Jeff was immediately suspicious. Crystal never changed her plans without informing him, and her phone was essential for her work. Things didn't add up, and fearing something was wrong, he reported her missing to the police before noon on August 26th. As floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and 2 family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house in over a week, but his daughter told Jeff that she had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home. Inside, authorities discovered Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, along with her purse and handbag, clear evidence that she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was evident that Stephen was involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, at the time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated the area, and many law enforcement officers and first responders were focused on rescue efforts in flooded neighborhoods. Consequently, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Desperate for answers, Jeff decided to reach out to the media to raise awareness and search for clues. However, his efforts were overshadowed by the constant news coverage of the storm. After days of no progress, Jeff hired a private investigator, feeling frustrated with the silence of local authorities. This decision sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney opposed the involvement of an outside investigator in Crystal's case, arguing that crucial evidence could be compromised. This resulted in increased tensions between Crystal's family, law enforcement, and the local media in Houston. Unwilling to give up, Jeff teamed up with Crystal's new boyfriend, Paul, to offer a $15,000 reward for credible information. They launched a social media campaign that ultimately attracted public attention. However, the investigators began to suspect not only Stephen but also Jeff and Paul. Although Jeff was tirelessly searching for Crystal, law enforcement remained skeptical of him. Rumors about his personal life, including his same-sex relationships, spread throughout the town of Baytown, leading some to believe that these biases influenced how authorities perceived his involvement. The local police commander dismissed Jeff's concerns during a national broadcast, labeling him as overly emotional and a hindrance to the investigation. Paul was also scrutinized. After taking a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his credibility came into question. Things worsened when he sent surveillance footage from his home to news outlets instead of directly giving it to the police. Paul defended his actions by stating that he initially tried to share the videos with the sheriff's office but felt ignored, prompting him to go public to clear his name. Then there was Stephen. Even though he displayed manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal left him, investigators perceived him as polite, helpful, and cooperative. However, family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and controlling. Authorities did not see Stephen as a potential threat or a vengeful ex-husband. This perspective began to shift on Tuesday, August 29th, as floodwaters receded. A family friend discovered Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a dilapidated motel, an area highlighted during their online campaign. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators suspect the car was staged as a burglary, but flooding has made it difficult to access. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she disappeared. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He did not purchase gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car was still there. Even more unsettling, other footage captured a hooded figure resembling Stephen riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The evidence was accumulating, and for the first time, attention turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband but as a potential suspect in a case that had gone too long without resolution. The investigation took a significant turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart, situated just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was discovered, showed a man who looked like Stephen buying a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid with cash, and the timing matched the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this troubling evidence, he denied being involved in Crystal's disappearance. As authorities indicated they lacked direct evidence, they allowed him to go home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Her uncle, Jeff, pointed out to the district attorney that Crystal had previously reported that Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she left him. Jeff was convinced of Stephen's emotional and mental instability. It wasn't until September 8, nearly 2 weeks after Crystal vanished, that the district attorney intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. However, Stephen controlled the situation. He requested to return home for one last night to organize things and promised to confess the next day. Jeff and other family members were angry, fearing that this unsupervised time might allow Stephen to harm himself and evade justice. On September 9, 2017, Stephen returned to the police station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal had told him she would be taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on a family trip instead of him. Due to this, he became enraged. While their children slept upstairs, he attacked Crystal from behind and strangled her to death. Afterward, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove before sunrise to a wooded area near his home, where he disposed of her remains. Even after confessing, he still refused to reveal the location of the body unless the prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Due to the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities worried that they wouldn't find the body without his assistance, so they accepted his terms. Later that day, Stephen guided authorities to a remote, overgrown area, and Crystal's remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, who was 44 at the time, was charged with first-degree murder, and bail was set at $500,000, which he could not afford. In addition to the issues of jealousy and anger, the case also highlights a more terrifying truth. Without Crystal, Stephen would have no financial resources to support himself and his children. The pursuit of justice moved slowly, as the trial did not commence until June 2019. During this time, Stephen displayed no remorse in court. He tried to create the impression that he was a man suffering from pain, claiming he acted out of a sudden fit of passion, a defense strategy in Texas that could significantly lessen his punishment if accepted. He also suggested that Crystal's death was the result of a consensual encounter that went awry. However, the prosecution effectively countered this narrative, highlighting the ongoing emotional abuse and control he had imposed during their relationship. Stephen's defense team attempted to tarnish Crystal's reputation by presenting unverified text messages and claims that she had been unfaithful. However, her friends and family stood up for her, describing her as a vibrant and loving person dedicated to her children. They also shared experiences of the years of dysfunction and manipulation she endured. One of the most heart-wrenching moments during the trial occurred when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand. She recounted a painful revelation in December 2017, when Stephen and Crystal's 5-year-old daughter shared a secret. The girl recalled the morning her mother went missing. She had heard her parents arguing. After hearing the commotion, she walked from the bathroom into the bedroom, where she witnessed her father pushing her mother onto the bed and covering her mouth and nose with his hand. She stood at the edge of the bed and watched until her mother stopped moving. Afterwards, her father took her upstairs and told her not to speak about what she had seen. Mandy quickly reported the incident to the authorities, and she was placed in a trauma counseling program, but the emotional scars continued to haunt her. Another important witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. Melissa testified about helping Crystal move out of her home when her conflicts with Stephen escalated. Melissa later supported her move back home after Stephen threatened to harm himself if she did not return. Cherry recounted that even after the divorce, he continued to emotionally manipulate Crystal, including starving himself to make her feel responsible for his health. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's house, where they found him looking anxious, shaking, and in tears. The daughter of Crystal and Stephen claimed that she had seen her mother the day before and pointed to a black dress in the closet in a concerning manner, saying that evil spirits had taken her away. This disturbing scene prompted Melissa and Jeff to call the police from outside the house, urgently requesting that they remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their requests were ignored. Melissa also shared her account of a family cruise that Stephen had suggested as a way to say goodbye peacefully. Although Crystal hesitantly agreed, she made it clear that there would be no threats, manipulation, or harm involved. However, as the trip approached, an argument over finances led her to cancel, realizing that Stephen was not genuinely trying to say goodbye but was instead attempting to win her back. The most troubling testimony came from an inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen and claimed that Stephen confessed in detail to killing Crystal. According to the inmate, the motive was a text message from another man. He described how Stephen admitted to using zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after her death, information only known to the forensic team. Officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety corroborated parts of Stephen's confession, stating that he claimed Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They had an argument, during which she told him that she had never really loved him. She encouraged him to move on with his life. In a fit of rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial concluded quickly. The jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder in just 3.5 hours. On September 10, 2019, he received a sentence of 50 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 25 years before being eligible for parole, potentially allowing for his release in 2042. Crystal's family was heartbroken by what they perceived as a light sentence. Her uncle Jeff exclaimed in court that Stephen deserved a harsher punishment, while others expressed frustration, advocating for a life sentence or the death penalty. However, those options were not available due to the agreement Stephen made in exchange for revealing the location of Crystal's body. The family's main concern was not the length of the prison sentence but rather the emotional impact on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, they faced a devastating loss. Crystal had dedicated her life to them, and now they were left to cope with trauma that many adults would struggle to endure. By 2020, Mandy, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was working to adopt them legally. Some sources indicate that Mandy was Crystal's best friend from childhood, while others suggest they may have had a romantic relationship at one time. Regardless of their history, Mandy was Crystal's most trusted confidant and was committed to caring for the children. Now that you know the complete story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Please share your opinion in the comments. We are reading all of them. Jennifer grew up in Oklahoma, raised by her mother, and had a brother named David. Although from a humble background, Jennifer had a good childhood. She completed high school and went on to study business at National University. Her friends described her as a very sweet woman. One thing that was dear to Jennifer was her faith. Whenever she thought about marriage, the first quality she wanted in a husband was his attachment to religion. Jennifer met 25-year-old Michael Blagg at a party. He was a helicopter pilot in the U.S. Navy and was stationed in San Diego at that time. Michael had grown up in a family that moved frequently because his father was a colonel in the Air Force. He was an incredibly well-behaved child, extremely intelligent, and hardworking. He consistently earning good grades, excelling in co-curricular activities. Michael was so bright that he got into the governor's honor program and attended Georgia Tech to study nuclear engineering. To afford college and complete his higher studies, he enlisted in the Navy. Jennifer was quickly drawn to him because he seemed to value faith as she did. The two began meeting frequently. Michael appeared to be a great family man in Jennifer's eyes, someone who would provide for her and their future children. Jennifer and Michael got married in 1991. While it was Jennifer's first marriage, Michael had been married before. However, that marriage only lasted a year before he parted ways with his first wife. After some time, Michael retired from the Navy and began a career as an engineer. The Blagg family moved to Simpsonville, South Carolina. They welcomed a baby girl named Abby. Jennifer loved living in Simpsonville. The family made new friends through their church, and Jennifer started teaching a women's Bible study group. Michael also became a co-teacher at the Bible school. Jennifer had found a strong, take-charge person in Michael. He was very caring, protective of her. However, according to Jennifer's friends, her behavior suggested otherwise. Sometimes, she becomes anxious and often panics when Michael is about to come home. Jennifer always focused on keeping the house in perfect condition so that Michael could have a comfortable environment when he returned from work. Despite all this, the Blagg family seemed happy. Things took a complete turn when Michael found a new job as operations manager at a manufacturing plant in Grand Junction, Colorado. Jennifer did not want to leave her happy routine in Simpsonville, but she felt compelled to be a dutiful wife to Michael. The family moved to Grand Junction in 2001, and Jennifer started to appear unhappy. it was evident that something was wrong in her personal life. At the time of the move, Jennifer was 34 years old, and Abby was just 6. Just a few months after moving to their new home, an incident occurred that shocked the entire community in Grand Junction. On November 13, 2001, Michael left for work early in the morning. Every day, he would leave early and return in the evening. Due to his protective nature, he would call Jennifer multiple times throughout the day to check if she and their daughter Abby were okay. However, when he called home after arriving at the office, no one picked up the phone. This was unusual since Jennifer always answered his calls. After waiting some time for her to call back, he tried again, but still, no one answered. Concerned for the safety of Jennifer and Abby, Michael left a voicemail. "Hope everything's okay." When there was still no response or news of Jennifer and Abby after several hours, Michael decided to leave the office early and check on his family. As soon as he arrived home, he called 911 and reported that both his wife and daughter were missing. He also informed the operator that there was blood all over the master bedroom of their house. Law enforcement authorities rushed to Michael's home. When police officers entered the bedroom, they found a significant amount of blood. Additionally, the jewelry box was tipped upside down, and Jennifer's purse was dumped on the floor with its contents scattered throughout the room. Initially believed to be a kidnapping case, the officers quickly changed their minds due to the volume of blood present. Kidnappings typically do not leave behind such a large amount of blood at the crime scene. Authorities recognized that there was another aspect to this story. Furthermore, the placement of the blood was peculiar. It was only on the bed, while the walls in the hallway were absolutely clean, with no drag marks in the house. While the investigation team was searching for a murderer, Michael appeared to believe that his wife and daughter had been kidnapped and were still alive. He even requested the public's help in locating his family and posted a reward of $3,000 for anyone who provided information about Jennifer and Abby. The Colorado River became the focal point of the investigation, as the police believed the victims' bodies might have been dumped in the area. While the investigators were searching the areas near the Colorado River, forensic experts were working inside the Blagg home to find any clues that might lead the authorities to Jennifer and Abby. According to people in the neighborhood, the last they had seen of the victims alive was a day earlier, when Jennifer came back home after picking up Abby from school. As forensic experts examined different parts of the house, they found blood in the family van. This was the point when Michael turned from a grieving husband and father to a suspect in a double homicide case. When he was interviewed, he claimed he didn't know anything about where Jennifer and Abby had gone. He said that he hadn't got a clue who would have any malice in their heart against anyone in their family and that Abby was a wonderful girl. Michael provided investigators with a timeline leading up to the incident. He stated that the night before his family went missing, Abby went to bed at her usual time of 7 p.m., while he and Jennifer stayed up late, as was their custom. Around 8 p.m., Jennifer received a phone call from a friend who invited her to lunch the following day. She accepted and planned to meet her friend before going to bed with Michael around 10 p.m. On the day of the incident, November 13, 2001, Michael woke up at approximately 5:30 a.m. to go to work. He noted that both Jennifer and Abby were still asleep since they typically woke up around 6:30 a.m. Michael usually called Jennifer several times during the day to check on her, and he did the same on November 13th. However, she did not answer his calls. At first, he did not think much of it, but after a few hours, he became concerned and returned home, only to find that both his wife and daughter were missing. It was evident to someone that November 13th would be an unusual day for Jennifer and Abby, as Abby's school received the call on November 12th. The caller informed the school administration that Abby would not be attending classes the next day. While the school did not know who made the call, they recorded that Abby was expected to be absent on November 13th. In addition to the previously mentioned voice notes, more were discovered. One of them included the message in which the sender greeted his bride and expressed hope that she was out enjoying herself and doing exciting things. As the investigation expanded, the officers began to strongly suspect that Michael had something to do with the disappearance of Jennifer and Abby. Michael, on the other hand, constantly denied this, even criticized the police for considering him a suspect in the case. He told the press that it bothered him to be looked into, despite the fact that he had lost his wife and daughter. A month after Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael moved out of the family home, stating it was too hard to stay in the house where he lost them. While investigators did their job, Michael kept making frequent appearances in the media, saying he believed this was a case of burglary gone wrong. Michael even bought Christmas presents for Jennifer and Abby, told everyone he hoped they would be home soon to open them. People were sympathetic towards Michael because he wasn't only grieving the loss of his family, he was also a suspect in their possible murder. However, police and some of Jennifer's friends believed Michael had something to do with his wife and daughter's disappearance. As time passed, the suspicion grew stronger due to new evidence and witness testimonies, yet Michael maintained his innocence. Initially, he denied having any fight with Jennifer before she and Abby disappeared, but investigators later found a note in which Michael apologized to Jennifer for letting the devil get a foothold in their lives. However, that wasn't as strange as the discovery of thousands of adult images in the Blagg home. When questioned about them, he claimed Jennifer had downloaded these images because she wanted to be a good wife and serve her husband. One of Jennifer's friends also provided the police with peculiar information. According to her accounts, right before Jennifer and Abby went missing, Jennifer called her and asked if they could visit her, stating that Michael would not be with them. This was unusual for she, who knew the Blagg family always traveled together. In February 2002, Michael was caught stealing a shredder and a table from his office. He was brought in for questioning about the theft. While answering questions from investigators, Michael kept asking about the possible penalties for murder. This behavior was particularly strange coming from someone whose wife and daughter had disappeared a few months prior. Investigators compiled all their information on Michael and tried to crack him under questioning. One day, when the officers rang Michael's bell, no one answered the door. They could hear the sound of running water coming from inside the house, but no one responded to the knocks on the door. Suspecting something was wrong, the police kicked the door open. When they entered the bathroom, they found Michael lying in the bathtub with his wrists cut. There was also a photo of Jennifer and Abby with him, along with a note saying that he didn't kill his wife or daughter. He was quickly taken to the hospital and given medical care. Due to the harsh winters in Colorado, the search operation was halted until spring. After the initial attempts, the search resumed in April. Investigators marked a 45-kilometer radius for the search operation, but they couldn't find any clues regarding the bodies of Jennifer or Abby. In the meantime, one of Michael's co-workers called the police and shared an important tip. On the day of Jennifer and Abby's disappearance, Michael's colleagues saw him taking the trash out at work. Michael was pushing a pallet jack with 2 large cardboard boxes, which he discarded on the loading dock that led to the trash compactor. The co-worker, unaware of the contents of the trash, even asked Michael if he needed any help discarding it. A person discarding normal trash would have said yes, but Michael Black immediately declined the offer. It was unusual for someone working as an engineer in the company to have anything to do with trash handling. This was an important lead that could take the authorities to Jennifer and Abby's bodies. The first task was locating the landfill where Michael's firm was dumping their trash. Once the landfill site was tracked, the most challenging aspect remained: locating the possible areas in the landfill where trash from Michael's company might have ended up. When this development was revealed to the public, a normal person would have been happy that the case of his wife and daughter's disappearance was nearing closure. However, Michael did exactly the opposite and left the state. It was particularly strange that Michael never shared his plans or his whereabouts with anyone, including the police. Nearly 7 months after Michael's wife and daughter went missing, the authorities finally discovered what they had been searching for. On June 5, 2002, after weeks of searching, they located Jennifer's body in a landfill, wrapped in a red and black tent. The body was unwrapped, cleaned, and sent for an autopsy. The results of the autopsy shocked everyone, including Jennifer's family and friends. She had been shot in the left eye, with the bullet still lodged in her skull. The report indicated she was killed while sleeping, as investigators found a retainer in her mouth that she only wore at night. After discovering Jennifer's body, investigators suspected that Abby's body was also in the same landfill. They intensified their search efforts to find Abby's remains, but despite 7 weeks of searching, sifted through approximately 7,000 tons of trash, the police could not locate her. Michael Blagg was in custody. The police had a strong reason to arrest Michael, but they faced a challenge: no one knew his whereabouts. After some investigation, they discovered that Michael's mother lived in Georgia, leading them to believe he might be hiding with her. This suspicion turned out to be correct. When the police searched her house, they found Michael there. He was quickly arrested and transported back to Colorado to face charges for the murders of his wife and daughter. This was the first time the public learned that the man pretending to be a grieving husband and father was actually his family's murderer. At this point, Michael's first wife also spoke out in the media, claiming he was a normal person who had never abused her during their marriage. However, as the investigation continued, it became clear that the Blagg family's life was not as perfect as it appeared. From the start, Jennifer and Michael frequently argued. After they married, Jennifer discovered that Michael was not the religious man she believed him to be. He attended parties, which Jennifer disapproved of due to her religious values. Despite her repeated requests for him to change what she considered unacceptable behavior, Jennifer ultimately told Michael he needed to choose between her and his partying lifestyle. Michael promised Jennifer that he had changed his ways, and their relationship seemed to improve. This period also saw the birth of their daughter, Abby. However, Michael's commitment to the Navy meant he was often away, which contributed to Jennifer experiencing postpartum depression after Abby's birth. When Michael left the Navy and took a job teaching Sunday school, Jennifer learned something alarming: he had begun behaving inappropriately with the children. He was sharing his conservative views on sensitive issues like abortion and intimate, which ultimately led to his dismissal. This incident exacerbated the Blagg family's financial troubles, as they were struggling to sell their previous home. When the house finally sold, they incurred a loss of over $8,000. Jennifer frequently spoke to her friends in Simpsonville about her dissatisfaction with life in Grand Junction. Despite her unhappiness, she expressed a willingness to remain in Colorado to support Michael, as he seemed content with his job. Meanwhile, as the police sought to uncover the motive behind Michael's alleged murders, a legal firm employee came forward and revealed that Jennifer had visited their office just days before she went missing. She was visibly upset and wanted to consult an attorney. It was later revealed that Jennifer was a victim of abuse at the hands of Michael and was seeking a divorce. Investigators examining Michael's computer discovered that he regularly used an escort service. Interviews with the escort service employees revealed that Michael often visited for massages from topless women. When questioned, Michael claimed that his wife was aware of this because they were having intimate issues, and he went to the massage center for research. However, it was later revealed that Michael had a strong addiction to adult movies and had coerced Jennifer into watching it with him. This explained why Jennifer wanted to separate from Michael. Her diary indicated she was very religious, continually praying and trying to strengthen her relationship with God. Additionally, investigators found a note in one of Jennifer's books where she described a recent argument with her husband. The evidence and testimonies against Michael clearly indicated that he was abusive and pressured Jennifer into unwanted situations. When she resisted, he decided to kill her to hide his secret life and addictions. This also shed light on the disappearance of Abby. Investigators believed she may have witnessed her father's murder of her mother, leading Michael to kill her as well. Due to insufficient evidence linking Michael to the murders of Jennifer and Abby, the prosecution opted not to pursue the death penalty. Michael was granted bail and allowed to live with his mother while he awaited trial. In March 2004, his trial began, and he faced charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that Michael killed his wife because she wanted a divorce. Afterward, he wrapped the bodies of his wife, Jennifer, and their daughter, Abby, and took them to his workplace, where he discarded them. He then acted as if nothing had happened, calling home multiple times and leaving voicemails to give the impression that he was completely unaware of the situation. On November 13th, he called the police, claiming it was a case of home invasion. Jennifer's mother, Marilyn Conway, testified that Jennifer had abused her daughter multiple times during their marriage, including an incident where he choked her while intoxicated. The defense attorney claimed that an intruder broke into their home, killed Jennifer and Abby when they tried to resist. Throughout the trial, Michael insisted he was innocent and not involved in the murders of his wife and daughter. On April 16, 2004, a jury convicted Michael Blagg of murdering his wife, sentencing him to life in prison without parole. However, 10 years later, the conviction was overturned because one of the jurors had falsely reported their history of domestic violence on the juror questionnaire. This led to Michael being granted a retrial, but the Colorado Supreme Court issued an emergency stay to keep him in prison while he awaited the new trial. Michael Blagg's retrial commenced in February 2018, during which his lawyers presented new evidence in hopes of proving his innocence. They also challenged the investigative methods used in the original case. Despite these efforts, Michael was again found guilty of killing his wife and received the same life sentence as before, concluding this tragic case. Abby's body was never found, so Michael was not convicted of any crime related to Abby due to lack of evidence.